steel, firearms, and the industrialists crossing into another world. Hello again, dear adventurers of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us once more on this epic journey. Remember, this story is pure science fiction from our wild imagination. So don't go trying to summon dragons in your backyard. The rights of this amazing novel belong entirely to its original author. We are only the narrators. Do you want more adventures? Show some love to our YouTube channel with a subscription and a like. And if you want exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting for you with open arms. Chapter 326. Antonio knew Barnett was a lone wolf, his personality and abilities suited to working alone. Forcing him to cooperate with others would likely cause trouble. At this moment, someone snorted. It was a woman's voice, her face hidden under her hood. She spoke with obvious displeasure. The Northwest Bay was never a significant part of our overall plan. It's just that reckless Barnett has lost his mind, single-mindedly causing trouble there. It's good that the plan failed. It'll curb his arrogance and make him obediently follow the overall arrangements in the future, Antonio said. Master Barnett must have his reasons. Let's begin today's meeting. Let's start with a recent situation in southern Aldo. I heard our Grand Duke, the greedy wolf, is in a bit of trouble. Everyone looked at Ambov, the captain of the Royal Guard beside Antonio. He was always responsible for contacting and arranging affairs in southern Aldo. Ambov replied respectfully, "Yes, Your Highness. In March of this year, Princess Catherine led the main force of the kingdom's army south. By the end of the month, the kingdom's army easily defeated the southern army near Thorn Fortress and then continued south. The princess's advance exceeded Giles's expectations. Having just pacified the southern forces, he had no time to regroup before marching north. The two sides engaged in a stalemate in the Furor region, during which they clashed several times, with each side experiencing victories and defeats." Antonio muttered thoughtfully to himself, "Even with our help, is this still the case?" One of the men in black robes, hearing the prince's words, spoke in a hoarse voice, "Your Highness, according to the plan you set before the Eastern expedition, besides weapons and provisions, we have also successively dispatched 2 batches of mages to serve in Giles' army, totaling about 30 people. Any more might attract the attention of secular forces and prematurely expose the organization's secrets. However, if we go all out to support Giles, with the organization's current strength, we can easily defeat Princess Catherine's army. I have 100% confidence in this," the elder added. "The mages we sent to support Giles are mainly skilled in enchanting, which can greatly improve the soldiers' equipment performance, thus making it less likely to attract attention. We also have a batch of secret potions," Ambov suggested. "I think we should increase our support. Giles is still in a relatively weak position. In their initial plan, they intended to keep the battle line around the Thorn Fortress, but now they've reached Fugger, a considerable distance south of the Thorn Fortress." Antonio waved his hand. "Our fundamental goal is to plunge the kingdom of Aldo into internal strife, leaving them unable to spare any attention so we can focus on dealing with the matters within Gabella. If Giles can hold out, what difference does it make whether the battlefield is at Thorn Fortress or Fugger?" The old scholar Aldrich, sitting on the other side of the prince, said, "That's right. It's best to leave Giles, this wolf in sheep's clothing, half dead. If we fatten him up, he might turn on us." A flicker of guilt crossed the old scholar's eyes. Instigating internal strife within the kingdom of Aldo went against his conscience, but for the sake of a longer-term plan, he had no choice but to participate. Ambov said with some worry, "However, according to the intelligence I've gathered about Aldo, the balance of power between Giles and the kingdom's government is shifting." "Oh?" Ambov's words drew the attention of everyone present. For them, Giles' premature demise would not be a good thing. The head guard explained, "Princess Catherine's kingdom army, their equipment is getting better and better. Besides swords, spears, and halberds, their armor coverage is also steadily increasing." The old man in black robes was somewhat surprised. "Is the Aldo royal family that rich?" A hoarse voice rang out. "Impossible. Last year, they spent a huge amount of money just on procuring military provisions, unless gold coins rained down from the sky of crystal radiance." Aldrich stroked his beard and guessed, "Perhaps it's tribute from the northern territories? If so, then we need to reassess the Aldo royal family. The Scrotter family still has a certain prestige," Ambov continued. "Our method of supporting Giles is also somewhat worrying. Previously, we used agents to entrust the shipments to merchants in the Horn Bay area to transport goods to the south of the kingdom. It seems that the Aldo people have discovered the role played by the Horn Bay merchants and have put pressure on the countries in Horn Bay. Now, the governments of these countries are strengthening their control over their own merchants. The meeting room fell silent, as if everyone was thinking about ways to restore the balance of power between the two sides, without revealing themselves too much. The old man in black robes glanced at Antonio and said, "Your Highness, it's time to use our own naval forces. Send a message to Edward." Since witnessing the greatness of the arcane, he has been subservient to us. Antonio only pondered for a moment before agreeing to his suggestion. "Very well, send Edward out to deliver the necessary provisions and weapons to Giles. Also," the prince paused, his blue eyes flashing, and everyone listened intently for his next sentence. "Order him to harass the coastal areas of the Kingdom of Aldo when the opportunity arises, especially the royal territories." Aldrich, standing to the side, frowned. Sigh. This prince's heart is hardening more and more, but such ruthlessness is a necessary tool on the road to becoming a king. Clap. 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 The hoarse voice clapped its hands and chuckled sarcastically. Head, the great pirate captain's back to his old ways. "But your Highness, let's turn our attention back to the country. Your elder brother seems to be getting restless lately. Don't you have any thoughts on that?" Antonio didn't look at him, he knew what the other man was talking about. The others were somewhat displeased. This fellow's tone was far too disrespectful in front of his Highness. The old man in black coughed, reminding the other man to be mindful of his manners. The hoarse voice continued, "Your Highness, do you still harbor the naivete of the past, fantasizing that the two brothers can coexist peacefully? HMPH. Remember my words, Oliver Griffin is absolutely the biggest obstacle to your first move. It's better to act sooner rather than later." Antonio tapped his finger lightly on the table, and the hoarse voice immediately stopped. "I will handle this myself." An unquestionable gaze fell upon the owner of the hoarse voice, who lowered his head. "Yes, Your Highness." Next topic, Corner Bay. After the meeting ended, everyone left the room one after another. The old man in black robes stopped the owner of the hoarse voice and said in a deep voice, "You were far too rude to His Highness Antonio today." "How?" the hoarse voice retorted, "I was merely helping him grow quickly. He will have to face reality sooner or later, and have you forgotten? The Aldo royal family is related to the Diaz family by marriage. To attack Aldo is to attack Diaz. Our prince has always known what he needs and how to get it." After hearing this, the old man in black robes fell silent. Chapter 327. Wells sat sullenly in a restaurant in Lakeside Town, drinking his sorrows away. Just a few months ago, he was a renowned alchemist in Crystal City, a well-known figure with his own workshop, earning a substantial income and never worrying about food or drink. But ever since he took that damn job, he had plummeted to the lowest point in his life. It all started when an old customer introduced him to a powerful figure, so powerful that he could easily crush him like an insect. This nobleman claimed to have some physical ailments and needed the alchemist's help. Just as Wells was maliciously speculating whether the man was unsatisfied in bed, the nobleman removed his hat, revealing a head almost entirely bald. Well, not exactly bald, though, as some stubborn warriors still held the last line of defense. "Alchemist, I'm not even middle-aged yet, and I don't want to go bald so early." The nobleman's words were laced with sorrow, clearly showing his anxiety about his current appearance and his increasingly bleak future. "My lord, I'm willing to accept your commission, but I may need to conduct numerous experiments and make continuous improvements." Wells accepted the job without hesitation, for it was a crucial opportunity for him to achieve a leap in social status. The old customer who had introduced him had already said that if he could solve this nobleman's problem, a baronial title was guaranteed, and perhaps even a viscountship. A baron, though the lowest rank in the nobility, was still a nobleman, even higher in status than knights. The thought of commoners standing before him, respectfully calling him Lord Wells, filled him with longing. If he seized this opportunity, his descendants would be grateful. So Wells readily agreed on the spot, though at that time he still held some hope. His family had been in the alchemy business for generations, and they happened to possess an ancestral secret formula related to treating hair loss. He made a request that the other party personally test a medicine, arguing that individual constitutions differed, and what worked for one person might not work for another. He repeatedly assured the nobleman that no harmful ingredients would be added. The nobleman agreed. Such a powerful figure likely employed many servants specifically for testing medicines and wasn't worried about Wells tampering with it. The nobleman was delighted and invited Wells to dinner that day, which Wells considered an honor, even though the nobleman was only testing the medicine. Back home, he rummaged through his belongings to find the formula and spent a week producing a first draft. He eagerly delivered it to his powerful client, then returned home to await good news amidst the client's eager anticipation. A few days later, the client's servant arrived, inviting him to his home with great courtesy. Wells was overjoyed. The first dose of the medicine worked. What incredible luck! However, when he excitedly arrived at the nobleman's residence, the scene before him nearly made him faint. The enemy's head was now completely bald. The lone warriors who had been holding the ground had tragically fallen. "Look at the mess you've made, you fool!" The nobleman pointed at his bald head, spitting furiously, showing no regard for his status. He was clearly enraged. "Bah! What alchemist? I think you're nothing but a fraudulent charlatan, a maggot from the gutter. A rat from the sewers. I'll expose you publicly and ruin your reputation. Just you wait, you fool." Two burly guards immediately seized Wells, who struggled and cried out his innocence. "My lord, give me another chance. Could it be that this potion isn't for external use, but should be taken internally? Perhaps you could try again. Get out. Do you think I'll ever believe you again?" So he was stripped naked, shaved, and left with only a tattered cloth wrapped around his waist, then stuffed into a cage and displayed near the city gate for several days. As a somewhat renowned alchemist, Wells felt like committing suicide. When he was released, he found his shop vandalized, and everyone around him knew about his embarrassing state and was pointing and whispering. "Father, I'm so sorry." He sat dazedly on the doorframe, his eyes glazed, muttering to himself. Two figures approached. "Is this the unlucky fellow who offended some big shot?" "Yes, I saw him at the city gate." "I heard he's an alchemist," one of them asked Wells. "Hey, buddy. Can you hear me?" Wells instinctively looked up at the other man, his gaze still vacant. Could it be that he's been too traumatized and gone mad? "Want to try?" One of them pulled out a piece of paper. "Do you recognize the words on this?" Wells' mind went blank. Without thinking, he took it and began to read. Another man slapped his thigh. He can actually read. Who cares if he's an alchemist or not? Getting him over there will at least get the job done. "Once we have enough people, this month's bonus is secured," he said to Wells. "Brother, I don't think you'll make it in the capital. Lord Gleman in the Northwest Bay is recruiting. Want to try your luck? Go," Wells replied weakly. "That's exactly what I was waiting for." The man pulled Wells onto a carriage. It wasn't until 2 days later that Wells' mind cleared. He found himself sitting in a caravan and quickly realized his situation. He seemed to have been recruited by some lord. Upon asking, he exclaimed, "Damn, it's the Northwest Bay. Isn't that a god-forsaken place?" Although he couldn't make a living in the capital, with his abilities, he could easily find another place to live. Why go to that god-forsaken place to suffer? He was already clamoring to get out of the carriage when someone inside pulled out a piece of paper and showed it to him. "Mr. Wells, according to the contract you signed with us, you need to serve Lord Gleman for at least 5 years. Contract? What kind of damn contract? I didn't sign one." "Take a closer look." Wells looked closely and saw that his name was indeed on it, the handwriting was indeed his, and the content of the contract was indeed to serve a count named Paul Gleman for 5 years. You're kidnapping me." "I wasn't thinking clearly at the time." "Oh, Mr. Wells, you've just offended one nobleman. Don't want to offend another one, right? You?" The alchemist pointed at the other person with both anger and fear, then lowered his hand helplessly. Indeed, he was now just a commoner, and even the Lord of the Northwest Bay was not someone he could afford to offend. "Sigh, I'll just have to take it one step at a time." Wells leaned weakly against a car window, feeling that his future was bleak. Chapter 328. After nearly half a month of arduous travel, Wells finally arrived at the Northwest Bay with a convoy. To his surprise, it was not the desolate and dilapidated place he had initially imagined. Although the population density was not as high as in the south, it did not feel deserted. After entering a land called Emden, towns gradually appeared along the way, and the pedestrians he encountered on the road did not look as malnourished as the ones he had met before. This is one of the richest territories in the Northwest Bay. It used to belong to the Kent family, but they failed in their plot to seize the Northwest Dukeship not long ago, so this land now comes under the jurisdiction of our Earl Paul Gleman. The people here didn't live as well as you see now before. The former lord, Maltz Kent, was a cruel and heartless fellow. Now, My Earl has exempted them from a large number of exorbitant taxes, so they can finally fill their stomachs." During a rest stop along the way, Wells heard the leader proudly boast about his lord, the Earl for whom he would serve for 5 years. This lord seemed like a decent fellow, certainly much better than the one who'd imprison him at the city gates for a trivial matter. The further north they traveled, the better the road conditions became, wider and smoother, and the carriage ride became much less bumpy. They encountered more and more merchants along the way. Finally, the caravan arrived at their destination, Lakeside Town. Although called a town, it was actually quite large, almost like a small city. It was clear that the town hadn't been developed for long, as many buildings were quite new. This small town completely overturned Wells's preconceived notion that the Northwest Bay was a backwater. The streets were clean and tidy, paved with bluestone slabs, with very little litter and virtually no unpleasant odors, better than even the royal capital, Crystal Radiance, which Wells found incredible. The bustling crowds, their manners and expressions, were nothing like those of a rural area. He heard all sorts of accents, even foreign languages. Oh, even the Corner Bay language. Even the Corner Bay merchants, whom Wells considered to be from the ends of the earth, had come here to do business. Carriages laden with goods constantly came and went, indicating a thriving commercial sector. What impressed Wells even more was that pedestrians and carriages consciously kept to the right of the road, greatly reducing the chances of traffic congestion. Perhaps staying here for 5 years wouldn't be a bad choice, Wells thought, as he followed the procession to the town hall to register. The group was filled with all sorts of people, including blacksmiths, mechanics, and teachers, but the alchemist was alone. Wells was in a bad mood on the journey and didn't interact much with the others. The town hall of Horde was located in the heart of the new city on the south shore of Lake West. Previously, Horde was directly managed by the Council of Government, but since taking control of the great territory of Emden, the Council of Government separated a separate town hall to manage Horde, and the office was moved from the island in the lake to the new city on the south shore. The town hall officials arranged temporary accommodations for them and gave them a sum of money for their expenses for the next few days. After wandering around the city for a few days, Wells made many new discoveries. It turned out that many of the new things that had swept the capital in the past 6 months, such as the exquisite porcelain that nobles coveted, the new type of paper that scholars loved, and various printed books, were all produced here. "I never imagined there was such a place in the Northwest Bay," Wells exclaimed again, seemingly confirming that the rumors were unreliable. One day, after returning to his lodgings, the dormitory manager handed him a letter from the city hall, stating that he had been assigned work and needed to go to the city hall the following day. The next day, he went, and a government official led him to a saltpeter workshop, or rather, a factory. Announcing his appointment as the factory's chemical technology instructor, Wells had no objections. Coming from a family of alchemists, he was no stranger to saltpeter production, and so he began his new job. His daily work consisted of supervising the workers to ensure no errors occurred, inspecting product quality, and training apprentices, which he found quite enjoyable. Wells was quite dedicated to his work, proud of his alchemy identity and adhering to his professional ethics. He used his knowledge to optimize the saltpeter production process, earning unanimous praise from everyone in the factory. There were several other instructors in the factory, all alchemists recruited by Earl Giles from various regions. While exchanging experiences with his colleagues, though he actually held their expertise in contempt, Wells also inquired about various aspects of the workshop. According to others, this saltpeter refinery was owned by the Earl's family. What does Earl Gleman need so much saltpeter for? It's said to supply his ice-making facility. Oh, and speaking of ice, the Earl has invented a delicious treat called ice cream, made with ice chips, cream, and honey. You can buy some and try it. Selling this in the summer makes the Earl a fortune. Wells was a little puzzled. Could the money from selling snacks cover the cost of refining saltpeter? If a lot of ice was needed, couldn't they just collect it in winter and store it in ice cellars? They could have as much as they wanted. Why bother using expensive saltpeter to refine it on the spot? However, Wells didn't want to delve too deeply. After all, the Earl was the owner. How he used it was his own business, as long as he received his salary on time. As for salary, the Earl treated him quite well. Considering he was a high-level talent from the capital, he paid him 3 silver coins a month, and the saltpeter workshop also provided room and board. It was said that the Earl's various businesses all had very good employee benefits, and whenever they recruited, A large number of people would scramble to get in. If it were Wells who used to run a shop in Crystal Radiance, a mere 3 silver coins wouldn't have been enough to impress him. But that ancestral shop had been smashed to pieces, and because of that humiliating public display, his reputation in the capital had also vanished. But here in the Northwest Bay, 3 silver coins a month was more than enough for a single man like him to live a comfortable life. Wells wasn't dissatisfied with his current life. His long-term plan was to slowly save up a sum of money and open an alchemy shop after his contract with the Earl expired, in Lake Town, a small town he was very optimistic about. Back in the present, the reason Weisel was drinking angrily in the shop was because of another insult he had just suffered at the Lord's Manor. Chapter 329 The Creation of All Things. This morning, Lord Paul Gleman of Arda summoned Wells and the other alchemists to his castle. This was also the first time Wells had met the supreme ruler of this land. To the alchemist's surprise, he appeared to be only 15 or 16 years old, barely of legal age. Having lived in Lakeshire for so long, they had naturally heard of Earl Paul Gleman's numerous great achievements in military affairs. Upon assuming the position of Lord last year, he trained an army to quell the pirates who had plagued the Northwest Bay for years, then led an army to suppress the rebellion of Barden's vassals, and recently, he had joined forces with other lords to overthrow Earl Maltz Kent, who coveted the title of Duke of the Northwest. In agriculture, he surveyed land holdings, consolidated arable land, constructed irrigation systems, and implemented crop rotation. In commerce, he encouraged the development of maritime trade and sent envoys to Cape Bay. He was also an inventor, possessing a dazzling array of inventions, such as canned goods, porcelain, new types of paper, salt production methods, and a marvelous harvester. These inventions spurred the emergence of numerous new industries in Arda and Barden. Oh, and the legendary fire crossbow and thunder hammer that struck fear into the hearts of enemies also originated from this lord. These legendary feats bestowed upon the Earl numerous accolades, and the people spoke of him as if he were a prophet. It was a pity he was born in the Northwest Bay. If he were the lord of a territory further south, with a little more money, the bards would have long since hailed him as a young prodigy comparable to geniuses like Catherine Rodney or Antonio Griffin. The lord's youthful appearance did not quite match the legendary tales, which explained the alchemist's astonishment. However, what pleased them was that Earl Giles did not display the arrogance typical of nobles. "Gentlemen, please have a seat." The Earl gestured for them to sit, his manner more like an academic salon than a lord summoning his subordinates. He began by praising the alchemist's work, expressing his satisfaction with their achievements. The alchemists quickly offered modesty, promising to continue their efforts to live up to the Earl's expectations. Then, Earl Giles said something that sent shivers down the alchemists' spines. "I will build a laboratory in Lake Town to fully support your various alchemical experiments." Everyone was thrilled. To be able to freely explore the mysteries of alchemy in a well-equipped laboratory was every alchemist's dream. However, this was difficult. Limited by resources, most alchemists could only meticulously manipulate reagents and materials according to existing formulas and procedures, much like what they were doing now in the saltpeter refinery. Even those with wealthy patrons were still limited. Money wasn't given to be squandered. As a family of alchemists, Wells once had a small laboratory in Crystal Radiance, but that was in the past, and it couldn't compare to a laboratory supported by a fiefdom lord. Therefore, Wells was just as happy as the others. Suppressing his excitement, he cautiously asked, "How much support can you provide for our experiments?" Paul thought for a moment and said, "Before you conduct your experiments, submit an application explaining the purpose and significance of the experiment, the necessary conditions, and a preliminary budget. If I deem it reasonable, I will approve it. This process is called project approval. Then I will allocate funds to purchase materials and equipment, but every expenditure must be meticulously recorded, and I will have someone audit the accounts." It seemed he wasn't spending money on them without restraint, but the alchemists didn't have any ulterior motives. "Your Excellency is wise," someone had already begun to eagerly flatter him. "Your Excellency, you will surely receive a rich reward. Alchemy is the most wondrous field in the world." Others were painting a rosy picture for their lord. "Gentlemen," Earl Gleman waved his hands, seemingly unaffected by the numerous compliments. "I hope this laboratory will be established under the name of the Weiss Academy. From now on, you will essentially be working for the Academy and under the management of the Education Bureau." "The Education Bureau?" Everyone was taken aback. It seemed the head was a woman. We, a bunch of grown men, were going to be controlled by a woman? Well, not impossible, as long as they were willing to pay. Besides, she seemed to be a female scholar, she should understand the great significance of researching alchemy. The Earl continued, this is also for your convenience. You can select talented students from the academy as assistants or apprentices. Of course, this will be after they have completed their basic studies. Everyone nodded. The Lord was truly thoughtful. Your Excellency, regarding the results of the experiment, someone hesitated cautiously, looking somewhat embarrassed. His words reminded everyone of a crucial issue. In life, nothing is more about fame and fortune. Earl Gleman's expression turned serious. Since you're conducting your experiments with the Academy's financial support, the patent for your new inventions naturally belongs to the Academy. However, if it's a useful invention, the Academy will definitely give you a generous bonus. Okay, everyone's an adult, they know there's no such thing as a free lunch, and there's still a bonus to be had. But the person publicly proclaimed as the inventor of a new technology or the discoverer of a new theory must be the real person. Deception and fraud are strictly prohibited, and I will even draft relevant laws. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Actually, they were mainly afraid the Earl would claim the credit for himself. Finally, I suggest we name the laboratory Chemistry Laboratory, meaning the creation of all things a good name. Wells was the first to agree. Alchemy's initial purpose was to refine gold from other substances. Later, instead of gold, it created all sorts of other things. Isn't that the creation of all things? That makes sense. This name is very fitting. Chemistry, the science of creating all things. Everyone agreed with the name proposed by the Earl. Very well, Earl Gleman declared decisively, appearing quite pleased. Since everyone agrees, it's settled then. The discussion then proceeded with great enthusiasm, focusing on the construction of the laboratory. The atmosphere in the hall was incredibly lively. The Earl inquired in detail about all aspects of alchemy, skillfully changing the subject when it became too intimate to reveal his secrets. Everyone grew increasingly fond of their lord. The lively exchange continued until noon, when everyone's stomachs began to rumble. Earl Gleman invited them to stay for lunch. After the servants laid out the food, they continued their conversation as they ate. Gentlemen, the Earl said, fiddling with a strange set of utensils made of two thin sticks. I hope that once the laboratory is completed, it can first solve a problem for me. One of the older alchemists rose and replied, My lord, you have provided us with such a convenient environment, it is only right that we solve your problem. What is this problem you speak of? Paul Gleman casually answered, researching how to massively collect nitrates from excrement, urine, and decaying animal and plant carcasses. A chill swept across the table. Chapter 330. Excrement? Urine? The alchemists present were stunned. Wells was the first to stand up. Earl Gleman, if I may be so bold, how could you associate the great art of alchemy with such filth, especially during a meal? Filth. Paul realized he had made a slip of the tongue. I apologize, I shouldn't have brought it up in this setting. It wasn't a matter of occasion. The alchemists were extremely embarrassed. Their profession was considered respectable. If the Earl really made them study excrement, what difference would there be between them and those latrine cleaners? In this era, there was no such thing as labor being equal in status. Now it seemed the Earl was blatantly insulting them. Ahem, one of the older men, named Hoffman, coughed and stood up cautiously, asking, Lord Gleman, are you sure you're not joking? Only the lowest slaves deal with those things. We are, Wells added for him, we are alchemists. His tone was full of resistance. Paul stroked his chin. All right, I understand. Let's continue with our meal. Everyone assumed the matter was over and resumed fiddling with their knives and forks. Suddenly, the Earl said, I just remembered, the finances are a bit tight lately. The matter of establishing a chemistry laboratory might need to be discussed with the council. What? Their prize was about to slip away? Everyone tensed. Clearly, the Earl was threatening them. Either reject his proposed research project and return to the workshop as tedious technical instructors, working the same routine every day, or accept his project, enjoying the generous funding and exploring the infinite possibilities of alchemy in the laboratory. The group whispered amongst themselves, discussing their choice, while Earl Giles leisurely enjoyed his lunch. Finally, after a flurry of voices and glances at the table, most of the alchemists reached a consensus, sacrificed their temporary dignity for a brighter, longer-term future. What hadn't their pioneering predecessors tried to obtain gold? The older Hoffman spoke on behalf of everyone. Your Excellency, prioritizing the needs of our employers is the primary principle of our profession. After careful consideration, we should indeed approach the difficult problem you just mentioned first. Of course, this is contingent on having a convenient experimental environment. You've already abandoned your principles so quickly. Wells, still indignant, wanted to stand up and say something, but was immediately pressed back into his seat by his colleagues' angry glares. These guys are quite adaptable, Paul smiled happily. Since your enthusiasm is so high, I will certainly instruct the State Council to prioritize support for the construction of the chemical laboratory. Please go back and plan in detail, listing all the necessary items, and then we will discuss it further. Your Excellency is wise, Hoffman bowed to Paul. However, regarding your proposed plan, collecting saltpeter on a large scale using those filth, is it really feasible? They only knew that saltpeter could be scraped from toilets. If the Earl didn't mind the dirt, he could simply scrape it directly from the toilet. Paul, you all know what microorganisms are, right, everyone? Yes, knowledge about microorganisms is the first thing every newcomer to Lake Town is taught, including the alchemists. They've even had access to microscopes, the Earl's great invention, and have seen things invisible to the naked eye. Because of this, everyone in Lake Town has developed the habit of drinking boiled water. The high temperature kills those tiny insects invisible to the naked eye, and stomach upsets are likely caused by them. Paul, I have a bold hypothesis. Some microorganisms influence the transformation of matter in nature. The presence of nitrates in toilets might be related to some microorganisms we don't yet know about. In another world, this would be an undeniable fact, but in this world, it's just a bold hypothesis. The people here don't know anything about nitrifying bacteria. Everyone nodded, but most didn't take it to heart. Why don't you say it's related to the sun? If we can increase the number of microorganisms involved in saltpeter conversion, we can accelerate the production of saltpeter from feces or urine. Since they are alive, sunlight, temperature, and moisture can all affect their numbers. Whether the effect is positive or negative requires careful experimentation. So the Earl really does believe it's related to the sun. Lord Griles, we will certainly follow your instructions and do our best in the experiments. What could the alchemists do? Even if many thought the Earl's theory was absurd, they had to bite the bullet and do it for the long-awaited laboratory. After all, if it turned out to be a waste of time, it would be the Earl's money that was wasted. Very good. I will make time to work with you all. It would take forever for these clueless guys to create a saltpeter field on their own, so Paul naturally wanted to participate personally. He knew the general principles and methods of saltpeter accumulation. However, many people interpreted his words as the Lord checking from time to time to see if they were slacking off, so they all pledged their loyalty. And so, lunch at the Lord's Manor ended amidst everyone's own thoughts. These guys have no dignity whatsoever as alchemists. After leaving the manor, Wells went to a restaurant called Flying Dragon Pavilion, drinking alone while criticizing his colleagues' shameful behavior. However, a well-equipped and well-funded laboratory was also something he longed for, and for a moment, he was caught in a deep internal conflict. Hey! Isn't that Wells? A voice with a crystal radiance accent called out from behind him. Wells turned around and saw an acquaintance, the mechanic Guy Burns. Actually, they weren't exactly acquaintances, they had only done business together in Crystal Radiance. Moreover, Wells had previously looked down on Burns. He wasn't doing well in the capital, ostracized and even ridiculed by his colleagues, living a life of poverty. But the current Guy Burns completely overturned Wells' previous impression of him. Not only was he impeccably dressed, but he also possessed an inexplicable air about him, seemingly resembling those of officials. Burns? You've arrived in Northwest Bay too? Come in and have a seat. Out of politeness, Wells invited him to sit at his table and poured him a glass of wine. During their conversation, Wells discovered that this mechanic was doing remarkably well in Lacquer Town, highly valued by the Lord, who had even entrusted him with the management of the renowned machine factory, the place that manufactured wondrous machines like harvesters and flying looms. He was indeed an official, and a very important member of the Lacquer Town system. Naturally, the other man enjoyed high status, far exceeding that of Wells. A mere technician, a strong sense of resentment welled up within him. Back in Crystal Radiance, this kid was far worse off than him, yet now he was far superior. Under Burns' astonished gaze, Wells gulped down a large glass of wine. I too will seize this opportunity and reach the pinnacle of life. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 331. Since showcasing the flying shuttle loom and spinning jenny at the October launch event, many in the textile industry have expressed interest in purchasing them. At Paul's direction, the machine factory announced that some technical issues with the spinning jenny remained unresolved, temporarily halting sales, much to the disappointment of many factory owners. However, the flying shuttle loom was launched as scheduled, and the Lakeside Machinery Factory still received a large number of orders. Driven by demand, the factory expanded, began recruiting new apprentices, and prepared for mass production of the flying shuttle loom. Besides the flying shuttle loom, agricultural machinery such as cotton gins, threshers, chaff cutters, root cutters, and mills were also popular, and these were also included in the production expansion plan. The sales of the new machinery brought Paul substantial wealth. Although Paul had proactively separated the public and private coffers, the Lakeside Machinery Factory was the property of the Gleman family and not under the jurisdiction of the state council. Its income went into Paul's private coffers. However, like other factories owned by other factory owners, the machine factory was required to pay taxes, which went into the state council's public coffers. Many people found this particularly incomprehensible. In their minds, the entire territory belonged to the Gleman family, and the council's function was simply to assist the lord in managing territorial affairs, obeying Paul's every command. Paul had the final say on the public treasury under the council's jurisdiction, so what difference was there between the Gleman family's machine factory paying taxes to the council and someone simply passing money from one hand to the other? Despite numerous doubts, Paul insisted on this procedure, and in compliance with other laws, all Gleman family businesses, including the machine factory, were no different from other private workshops and factories. Another thing that pleased Paul was the development of maritime trade. With the continuous construction of civilian sailing ships, the proportion of goods transported by sea in exports was increasing, meaning that less money was being extracted from goods sold to the south by the various land-based checkpoints. To further develop maritime trade, the Council of State invested heavily in acquiring a shipyard owned by Earl Price Parker. This shipyard also occupied a natural harbor. The Franklin shipyard dispatched a large number of managers and technicians to take over the shipyard, upgrading its equipment and facilities, and training the shipyard's veteran craftsmen in preparation for producing new ships that met Arden's needs. Expanding domestic demand in the vast Northwest Bay Area was also part of Paul's and the council's plans. Since Paul proposed the customs union plan to Henry Ferdinand, who had just ascended to the dukedom of Cent, in the city, he had been promoting his plan to other lords. For several months, the various lords had been exchanging letters frequently, discussing the so-called customs union and secretly weighing its advantages and disadvantages for themselves. Before an external consensus was reached, internal disputes had already begun. Abolishing tariffs was a major undertaking. Following ancient tradition, Paul and Mellon jointly summoned prominent families, lower-ranking nobles, large landowners, and powerful merchants and workshop owners from Arda, Byron, and Emden, which had recently come under the administration of the council, to Laketown. Paul inquired about their opinions on the plan to form a customs union, explaining that its significance lay in reducing or even eliminating tariffs between the territories of the Northwest Bay, removing trade barriers, and thus forming a close-knit trade and economic zone. Paul had assumed this was merely a formality, and that these people would unconditionally support their lord's decision. However, they encountered strong resistance. The merchants and workshop owners welcomed the plan, as it would significantly reduce the cost of importing goods and raw materials, and if other territories implemented the same policy, the cost of selling goods to them would also decrease. The opposition came from the landowners, or rather, the plantation owners. Their lands produced the goods and raw materials needed by merchants and factory owners, grains for food and brewing, cotton and wool for textiles, and so on. If tariffs were reduced or even eliminated, skilled merchants and factory owners would have more choices, significantly reducing the competitiveness of their crops and severely impacting their income. Cutting off someone's livelihood is like killing their parents. In the past, when Paul implemented crop rotation, consolidated farmland, and even investigated land ownership, the landowners, while resentful of the lord's repeated reforms, generally cooperated, as many measures were beneficial to them in the long run. However, on the issue of tariffs, they showed unprecedented strong opposition and unity. Meanwhile, the lower nobles of Bayhorn and Emden, depending on their respective territories or the industries they personally managed, expressed either support or opposition. Paul now understood that tariffs were not merely a means for the lords to amass wealth, they were also a protection of promises made to supporters within their territories. In this era dominated by agriculture, the greatest reliance of the feudal nobles was on the landowners within their territories. The lords protected the landowners' interests through a series of policies, including tariffs, while the landowners contributed money and effort to maintain the lords' power and prestige. They even sent the best sons of their families to join the lords' armies, serving as squires, officers, and other important positions. The lords had no other choice. If not these sons of powerful families, were they to appoint illiterate peasants or serf children? Even proper communication was impossible. Many landowners in Bayhorn and Emden held knighthoods. They were an important part of the military force in their former territories. Although Arda didn't have true knights, the same principle applied. After the reforms, most officers in the new army were sons of landowner families, since they were literate from the start. Due to the overwhelming resistance, Paul had to announce that the matter would be discussed later. The opponents breathed a sigh of relief and, after cheering the new look of Laketown, gradually left. Although they could see that the Earl was extremely reluctant, Paul's first action after the meeting was to consult with Chief of Staff Schroeder about the army's rewards. Many officers had performed exceptionally well in the War of the Usurpers and deserved promotions. Many soldiers had fought bravely and deserved rewards. "I have no objection to your proposal," Paul said, marking the proposal. Schroeder handed him with a large check mark and signing his name. "However, this will leave many junior officer positions vacant, won't it?" "Yes, sir," Schroeder replied. "The plan is to fill these positions from veterans who have distinguished themselves in battle and students from the Gleman Academy." Very good. However, Paul stared into the old knight's eyes and said slowly, "Regarding the backgrounds of the new officers, you must control this ratio carefully." Schroeder gave the Lord a reassuring look. "Lord Gleman, I will control it." The Lord had discussed this issue with him long ago, and he knew the Lord's purpose. He had originally intended to gradually reverse the situation over several years, but the Earl seemed impatient. The Count's words echoed in the room. "Schroeder, I need the general staff. No, I need my own will, one that can directly influence the company and platoon levels." Chapter 332. In the early days of the patent law in Lakeside Town, there was little public support. Most people were skeptical, and after the initial novelty wore off, the general public believed it was simply a scheme by the Lord to protect his own inventions. This was perfectly normal. Historically, skilled individuals rarely passed on their expertise easily. Earl Gleman, as Lord, was likely no exception. No one would be happy to see others profit from their inventions without sharing in the spoils. However, Paul Gleman was the Lord. He could certainly demand others obey his laws. As for himself, would a lord be bound by his own decrees? That was ridiculous. Therefore, those who initially applied for patents were mostly self-proclaimed fame-seekers, using dubious inventions to gain notoriety. Paul had to instruct the government to strictly scrutinize applications and prevent substandard work from being submitted. "I think we should give it a try. The Lord must really mean it," Jim said, his eyes shining, as a group of students sat around a table discussing the patent law in a classroom at West College. Nick, sitting opposite him, hesitated. "I believe the Lord's decree isn't just talk, but these students had recently finished their geographical surveying work in Emden and returned to Laketown. They had learned about the patent law and someone immediately suggested patenting the lens rangefinder they had invented during the surveying. They discovered that, according to the patent system published by the State Council, inventions resulting from the collective wisdom of many people could be patented as a team project." But what? "Nick, what are you hesitating for?" Jim shouted impatiently. He was the one who first suggested patenting the rangefinder. Ever since learning about the patent law, Jim felt like he had needles growing on his backside and couldn't sit still. He constantly worried that someone would preemptively apply for a patent for the rangefinder. It wasn't impossible. The West College had dispatched surveying teams to many areas under the State Council's jurisdiction. What if another team had a sudden inspiration during their surveying? Good heavens, a fortune in silver coins would go to someone else. In Emden, senior officers led by Bryce had shown great interest in their lens rangefinder, saying it would be very helpful for artillery and scouts. If they could get the patent, wouldn't they be able to make money hand over fist? Was there a more stable customer than the Alda army? Jim even maliciously wondered if the military might preemptively apply for the patent. After all, those artillerymen and officers had also used lens rangefinders, and patent law didn't restrict the applicant's identity. Therefore, he was very dissatisfied with Nick's hesitation, but there was nothing he could do, since Nick had played a major role in the invention and improvement of the rangefinder. Nick looked up, his tone hesitant, and said, "But without that mysterious letter, we wouldn't have thought of using a lens to improve the rangefinder. I think it would be a huge mistake to apply for a patent without finding the writer." The initial version of the rangefinder invented for the artillery proved very inconvenient in practice, and its measurement accuracy was poor. While they were racking their brains for improvement, they received an unsigned letter detailing their idea of using a telescope to improve the rangefinder. After numerous experiments, Nick and his team finally achieved some success, and the artillerymen no longer needed to drag long ropes and require multiple people to measure distances. However, they couldn't figure out who wrote the letter. The person's knowledge of geometry was so profound that it was likely someone from the West College, or someone from the military or some relevant department of the state council, the latter being the most likely, otherwise they wouldn't know about the problems they were facing. "Why are you still worrying about all that?" The students split into two groups, arguing about whether to immediately apply for a patent. "Classmates, what are you discussing?" A melodious female voice came from outside, and a pretty figure entered the classroom. Everyone turned to look, and there stood Ms. Betty, the head of the Education Bureau of the State Council, and also their dean. "Good day, Ms. Betty," the students greeted her. Since Eileen took over Weiss Academy, she had been incredibly dedicated to improving teaching quality and daily management, recruiting teachers, dividing classes, refining courses, implementing strict examination systems, and so on. Weiss Academy was no longer the makeshift institution Paul had founded. In every aspect, it could be considered a legitimate school. Although this beautiful woman was quite young, even younger than some of the students, she was respected by everyone in the academy. Furthermore, her scholarly status and knowledge, especially her expertise in linguistics, were admired by all. Everyone knew that the recently popular telegraph communication project was designed and overseen by Ms. Betty. "Ms. Betty, it's like this." Nick stood up and, on behalf of the students, told Eileen about their troubles. "Oh? Can I see that letter?" Eileen asked, intrigued. Nick took out the letter and handed it to her. After reading only a sentence or two, Eileen almost burst out laughing. She was all too familiar with the writing style and the deliberately concealed handwriting. Why not sign it with her own name? Eileen wondered a little. After calmly finishing reading, Eileen said to the students, "I suggest you boldly apply for a patent. I recognize the handwriting in this letter, it's a friend of mine. I'm sure he'd be very happy for you to get the patent." But, despite the dean's words, several students, including Nick, still had doubts. "Could you introduce us? We'd like to talk to him. He should have a share in the patent too." "No need," Eileen waved her hand. "My friend's identity is not convenient to disclose, so there's no need for him to participate." Everyone guessed. Could he be someone involved in secret work? "Thank you, Madam Dean." Jim smiled happily, nudging Nick beside him with his elbow. "The madam has already confirmed it. What are you still hesitating about?" "This, all right, we'll write the application right away," Nick finally agreed. Actually, he was quite eager to apply for a patent, but he just couldn't get over that hurdle. The classroom suddenly became lively. "We can build a factory and mass-produce rangefinders to supply the military and civilians. The market will definitely be huge, but building a factory must cost a lot of money, and we'll have to hire people. Then, let's start with a small workshop, earn our first pot of gold, and then build a factory. The rangefinder needs a telescope, and its patent belongs to the Lord. Don't forget that. We can just pay a usage fee, haha. Although this thing has a simple structure, with the protection of the Lord's laws, we're not afraid of others copying it," everyone discussed excitedly, envisioning a bright future. Eileen looked at the excited crowd, a sense of satisfaction welling up inside her. To use the law to protect and promote technological progress, this was a phrase Paul often used, and now it was finally beginning to show results. Chapter 333. On the western waters of the Kingdom of Waldo, a merchant ship was slowly sailing towards the kingdom's largest port, Westport. This merchant ship was a massive galley, its hull enormous, with 20 long oars extending from each side, rising and falling in unison to the beat of drums. Several men on deck vigilantly observed the surrounding sea, their eyes suggested they were more warriors than merchant crew. On the high sterncastle, 2 men leaned on the railing, each holding a glass of beer, gazing at the land appearing on the horizon. "What a fine day, Captain Edward," a young man with black hair and an earring said with a smile to the tall, middle-aged man beside him. "Indeed, a good day for gathering intelligence," the middle-aged man replied, raising his glass and taking a swig. He was robust, but his face was thin, with a mustache that swept back like swords. His skin was dark, and his face carried an indescribable air of vicissitude, but his eyes were piercing and unforgettable. No one knew that the great pirate who had once ruled the northwestern seas of Alder and then mysteriously disappeared, Captain Walker Edward, would soon reappear before the world. However, he now had another identity, a member of the sorcerer organization, the Arcane Society. He had been ordered by the organization to harass the kingdom's west coast, but as was his habit from years of piracy, he naturally wanted to do his homework beforehand. The young man raised his glass in response to the pirate captain, having returned to the waters of Aldo. "Captain, is it a nostalgic visit?" Feeling particularly nostalgic, the pirate captain, named Edward, shrugged. "I'm sorry to disappoint you. My men and I have mostly been circling the Northwest Bay. We've only been to the central waters of the kingdom a few times. As for any feelings, forget it. Besides, while the Royal Navy isn't as formidable as the Cape Kingdoms, it's not to be underestimated. It's not as easy to deal with as those lords in the Northwest. Oh, by the way, Nathan, speaking of the Northwest Bay, didn't you go there recently? What were you doing?" If it's convenient to tell me, the young man before him was named Nathan. Although young, he was a highly valued member of the organization and very capable. His most astonishing feat was burning down the Aldo capital's granaries right under Princess Catherine's nose last year. Keep in mind, this was when the kingdom's army had just recaptured Crystal Radiance, and the entire city was under martial law. Nathan thought for a moment, tilting his head, and said, "There's nothing I can't tell you. You know Maltz Kent, right?" Walker Edward chuckled. "Earl Kent? He's a tough one to deal with, ambitious, cunning, and ruthless, but that's been the case for all the heads of his family." "What, did he offend us?" Hell, not only did he not offend us, he even wanted to join the Mystic Order. Master Barnett contacted him, planning to make him an external force for us. He's no pushover. Precisely because he's no pushover, he can be used by us. Isn't Giles like that? That's true. You went there for this? Did it go smoothly? Nathan shrugged, pouting, and said, "It fell through." Edward was a little surprised. Even with the power of the Mystic Order, there was something they couldn't handle, and wasn't the other party also interested in joining? Seeing the pirate captain's expression, Nathan explained. Master Barnett's original plan was to first put him in the position of Duke of the Northwest, then purge the disobedient troublemakers, and install him as the second Grand Duke of Greed. But something went wrong. What went wrong? Master Barnett disappeared for some reason, and Maltz Kent took matters into his own hands before he returned, making himself the target of everyone's anger. What an arrogant fool. He didn't even consider his reputation in the Northwest Bay, and then the lords of the Northwest Bay who had old grudges against him united and went to war against him. HMPH, his own army was useless. He hadn't even warmed his seat as Duke before they were driven to his doorstep. And then, he was lying in his coffin. At this point, Nathan's lips curled into a smile, and he slowly said, "I did it." Edward asked, puzzled, "Why?" "Was it to prevent the organization's information from leaking out?" "That's one reason." "What use is such trash?" "But there's another one. This guy actually dared to blackmail us into providing him with aid. HMPH, an ungrateful dog that dares to bark at its master deserves to be cooked," Edward continued. "Where's Master Barnett?" Nathan shook his head. "Who knows? This lord's whereabouts are always unpredictable," Edward asked with some concern. "Could something have happened to him?" "Haha," Nathan chuckled. "You probably don't know him well enough. As a member of the 10-man Legion, Master Barnett's strength is unfathomable. He can handle a small army by himself, and even with a large army at his disposal, he can retreat unscathed. The power of secular lords is no match for him. The Maltz Kent I mentioned earlier is the second-ranking lord of the Northwest Bay after the Duke, yet he is still under Master Barnett's control. Let's not worry about unnecessary things." Edward nodded and took a sip of his drink. Nathan looked up into Edward's eyes. "Speaking of which, how did you join the Arcane Society, Captain?" Edward's face showed a look of reminiscence. After a few seconds of silence, he said, 10 years ago, I obtained an ancient scroll from a merchant ship. By chance, I came into contact with the power of arcane magic. Incredible things that had previously only existed in legends appeared vividly before my eyes. From then on, I became fascinated by it, or rather, possessed. It was truly a blessing from heaven. After that, my body awakened the potential for spellcasting. From then on, I desperately collected anything related to magic, even though it was taboo in the eyes of ordinary people. But this circle was so closed off that many people regarded magic as nonsense. My efforts finally paid off. I came into contact with the Arcane Society, and the door to the magical world finally opened for me. And behind the Arcane Society stood the revered prince. After I wholeheartedly contributed my power, the organization finally accepted me. Edward turned and leaned against the railing, looking up at the clear sky. That moment, how should I put it? For someone like me, an orphan since childhood, it felt like instantly returning home. Nathan pondered, yes, once our abilities as mages awaken, we essentially sever ties with mortals. Even if you don't have this awareness at first, day after day, you slowly experience that you are different, or rather, unacceptable to the world. Captain, you're very clever. You knew from the beginning to seek out your own kind. Only fellow mages can understand and tolerate each other. He changed the subject, but there are also some fools among our kind who naively believe they can blend in with mortals, unaware of the life-threatening price they'll pay if their identities are exposed. A cold glint flashed in Nathan's eyes. What we need to do is shatter their naivete and make them recognize the cruelty of the world. Chapter 334. Speaking of which, Nathan, how did you get into the Arcane Society? The conversation on deck continued, with Edward inquiring about Nathan's past. The young man, Nathan, smiled. Having a mother who was a spellcaster, you can't choose your own destiny, is that so? A hint of envy, even jealousy, appeared on the pirate captain's face. He had countless times fantasized about how wonderful it would be if he could have access to those mysterious knowledge from birth. He possessed a potential for spellcasting, yet he had wasted decades as a mortal, the most precious stage of his life. By the time he truly encountered arcane magic, his body was no longer young. If he had received guidance from a mage from a young age, his achievements would be far greater than they are now, at least far superior to this young upstart. Although somewhat reluctant to admit it, the young man before him held a higher position in the organization than he did. Excuse me, but which master is your mother? Edward was considering befriending the second-generation magician, hoping his mother might hold a high position within the organization. Nathan smiled and whispered a nickname. However, Edward's smile froze upon hearing the nickname, a surge of excitement rising within him. He had heard of this nickname before. Anyone with access to the inner workings of the Mystic Society was familiar with it and held it in high esteem, as it belonged to a master within the organization's highest authority, the 10-man group. The 10-man group was the core power structure of the Mystic Society. All major organizational actions were discussed and decided upon by the 10-man group before implementation. Master Barnett, whom they had just discussed, was a member of the 10-man group, but Barnett was somewhat eccentric and often went out alone, so only 9 members usually gathered together. So, your bloodline is that remarkable. Even Edward himself didn't realize that he had subconsciously switched to a respectful form of address when addressing the other man. While most mages feel superior to ordinary people, there are internal hierarchies. Although not absolute, the offspring of mages are more likely to awaken as mages themselves, especially when both parents are mages. Thus, when a family produces mages for several generations, the so-called mage families or pure blood families emerge. Mages from these families naturally feel a strong sense of superiority when facing mages from ordinary families. The Arcane Society was the most powerful mage organization Edward knew of. Those at the top of this organization were arguably the most powerful in the magical world. Nathan had such a mother and such a background, which Edward greatly envied. A sense of inferiority welled up within him, but then he heard Nathan say, regardless of what others think, I personally always judge people by their abilities. Bloodline? How? Edward sensed the sarcasm in his words. The other man continued, to be honest, I have a brother, the same mother and father as me, and the same blood in his veins, what you call remarkable blood, but he's just an ordinary man, and your brother, I don't know. We separated when I was very young, and my mother rarely mentions him. Edward didn't press further. The other man's family background seemed complicated, and it wouldn't be good to touch on things he didn't want to recall. An awkward silence fell between them as they silently drank their beer. As they talked, their ship drew closer to land, and the outline of the port city of West Harbor gradually came into view. Suddenly, the deck buzzed with excitement. Edward's men, chattering, crowded to the port side of the galley, peering north, seemingly having discovered something new. Edward and Nathan also looked north. Before them were several peculiar ships, no oars visible, only one or two tall masts with enormous sails. A sailboat propelled entirely by wind power? That's quite rare, Nathan remarked with surprise as he observed the distant vessel. That makes sense. In places like the northern seas, with their strong winds and high waves, this kind of sailboat is essential. Edward's tone held a hint of approval and mutual respect. Ship designers all over the world follow the design philosophy from Horn Bay, resulting in ships that are all homogeneous, uniform or powered sailing ships. When I was in Northwest Bay, I tried to design ships that didn't rely on oars, but unfortunately, with the resources I had, I could only build some small gadgets. Nathan laughed. Looks like you really have a wide range of interests, not just magic. After all, I make my living at sea. Speaking of Northwest Bay, Nathan looked at Edward with some amusement. Do you still keep in touch with your old subordinates who stayed there? Edward was taken aback, then realized what Nathan meant by old subordinates. He waved his hand and said, HMPH, just some small fry. They used to serve as the outer force in my fleet. Since I led my fleet south to pursue the power of arcane magic, I haven't bothered with them. Oh, a hint of regret appeared in Nathan's eyes. When I went to Northwest Bay, I heard that all the pirate groups there, big and small, had been wiped out by a certain lord. What? Edward was surprised now. It's said that a lord named Gleman created a weapon that can summon heavenly lightning. Gleman? That's a very low-profile family. Looks like a capable person has emerged from this family, and they're about to rise to power. As for summoning heavenly lightning, that's a bit far-fetched. In any case, this lord must control considerable naval power, otherwise, he couldn't have quelled the pirates so quickly. Intelligence indicates that the lords of the Northwest Bay are supplying the royal family by sea. We're likely to be facing them. HMPH, the lion's gone. Even the monkey dares to claim kingship. Edward's contempt was palpable. Just as they were discussing, a subordinate approached Edward and asked, Lord Edward, we are about to arrive at Westport. Should we enter the port? Edward waved his hand dismissively. Enter the port. Let's go ashore and take a look. A confident and proud expression appeared on his face. Nathan, I assure you, within a year, the west coast of the Kingdom of Waldo will be under the control of the Arcane Society. Not far from them, several sailing ships were also heading towards Westport. Chapter 335. 3 sailing ships, pulled by the laborers, slowly entered their berths. Half an hour later, Quake led several sailors off the deck and onto the dock. Northwest Industries was selling more and more military equipment to the kingdom's army. In addition, Alda continued to send extra aid in exchange for the royal family's favor. With the development of maritime transport capabilities, and to avoid accidents en route, Lacquer Town was increasingly reliant on sea transport of supplies, a more discreet method. This time, the Southern was escorting 2 cargo ships south to West Harbor. All 3 ships were loaded with supplies to support the kingdom's army, mainly canned goods and armor and weapons. They hadn't gone far when a hearty voice rang out, Haha, Captain Quake, is it your turn this time? Quake opened his arms. Oh, Viscount Dillon, long time no see. The two embraced warmly. To ensure safety during transport, Lacquer Town required the Navy to allocate a warship to accompany each delivery. Compared to other territories of the kingdom, the Northwest Bay initially provided the kingdom's government with relatively few supplies, but its stability and sustainability were its strengths. However, since Arda developed a blast furnace iron-making technology and the lords jointly built a Northwest industry, the military supplies from the Northwest Bay began to increase rapidly. Of course, most of the military equipment required the kingdom's government to purchase with real money. Within the core power circle of the kingdom's high command, the Northwest Bay began to slowly shed its previous image as a dispensable, barbaric land. His Majesty the King's worries about his youngest daughter lessened somewhat. With so many supplies being sent, she should be living quite well there if she had the money. To better utilize this supply chain, the kingdom's government stationed special liaison officials in West Hill to receive the arriving supplies. Dillon was the highest-ranking official among them. In his early 30s, he was a viscount, eager to make a big splash and accumulate experience for future promotions. When he was initially sent there, he was quite unhappy. Had he offended anyone? How had he fallen so low as to have to deal with a bunch of country bumpkins? But when he first saw the Northwest Bay fleet arrive and crates of supplies being unloaded from the ships, he immediately realized this was a rare opportunity. Quake handed him a document, saying, "This is the list of supplies arriving this time. Please check it, Your Excellency." Dylan patted Quake on the shoulder and laughed. "Haha, no rush, no rush. You Northwest people are reliable." What Quake and Dylan didn't know was that their meeting had been observed by someone with ulterior motives. In another berth, a galley was quietly moored. Edward and Nathan remained on the stern deck, observing them from a distance. Judging from their attire, they seemed to be officials from the kingdom's government, Nathan whispered. "The flag on that ship belongs to the Gleman family of Northwest Bay." "Yes, their red dragon insignia is easily recognizable," Edward added. "Looks like the captain is quite familiar with the major families of the Northwest Bay. HMPH, I've been there for so many years." Wait a minute." Edward suddenly stopped talking, focusing his attention on Quake, who was chatting happily with Viscount Dylan. After a while, he laughed again. "I didn't expect to run into an old friend here." "An old friend?" Nathan looked at Edward with interest. "Nothing, just some nodding acquaintances from when we were pirates, and he is, sort of, but it seems he's been absorbed into the Griles family now. Looks like my remaining brothers have indeed fallen into the hands of the Griles. It seems that the Lords of the North are indeed strongly supporting the royal family, at least in the Northwest Bay." Quake finished his conversation with Viscount Dylan. As usual, he was going to lead his disembarked sailors to a tavern for a big drink. He led his excited men toward the center of Westport. The group chatted enthusiastically as they walked, and after drifting for more than half a month, it felt really good to be grounded. "Long time no see." A strange voice reached his ears, and at the same time, someone shoved him on the shoulder. Quake was startled and quickly turned around. However, the person who had just brushed past him was walking very fast and was immediately swallowed up by the bustling crowd. He only vaguely felt that there was a tall figure in the crowd that he seemed to have seen somewhere before, but he couldn't piece together the specific memory. "How strange," Quake muttered. Perhaps it was just an accident, and that the voice wasn't meant for him. "Captain, what's wrong?" Alan, a naval officer candidate beside him, noticed Quake's abnormality and asked. Nothing, let's continue." The next afternoon, the 3 supply ships, including the Southern, were ready to set sail. Viscount Dylan saw Quake and his party off at the dock. Before the fleet arrived, the officials of the kingdom's government responsible for the liaison had already prepared the supplies for their northward journey, so the resupply was very fast. "Captain Quake, I need your help with something very important," Dylan said, reaching into his pocket. "Viscount, please speak." Dylan pulled out a letter and handed it to Quake. "Please deliver this letter to a young lady named Betty Diaz in your territory." "Ms. Betty? She's the head of education there." Quake was a little puzzled. "Who wrote to her?" "As far as I know, she's from Gabella." Dylan shook his head. "I don't know. This letter comes from the palace. The messenger instructed me to select someone of high standing from your side to carry it to the Northwest Bay. I think you, Captain, are qualified." "Haha, you flatter me, but I will definitely deliver this letter, please. I personally suspect that, judging from this Miss Betty's surname, she might be a relative of the Queen." Quake was a little surprised. "What? That's incredible, that's incredible." He carefully put the envelope away. Back in Horn Bay, he had already been shocked by the close relationship between the female advisor, Lady Sisha, and Grand Duchess Helen. He hadn't expected that the Lord would have someone with potential ties to the royal family. Quark patted his chest, repeatedly assuring Dylan, and boarded the Southern as the latter waved goodbye. The 3 sailing ships were towed away from their berths in turn, set sail, and headed north. Off the coast of West Harbor, a galley also slowly sailed south. On deck, Edward watched West Harbor recede into the distance, his eyes filled with coldness. "My lords of Aldo," he said, "next time we come, there won't be just this many people." Chapter 336. Night had fallen. In the warehouse area of the Westport docks, Viscount Dylan was still leading a group of officials, overseeing the unloading of supplies. 2 days ago, he had just hosted another fleet from the Northwest Bay. Quake's fleet had arrived last month, And yesterday it was led by a captain named Tirpitz. The Northwest Bay Fleet had once again delivered a large amount of supplies. Since the latter half of 1991, the Northwest Bay had been delivering supplies to Westport almost monthly. It was now December, and the city had just experienced a light snowfall. In a small hut, the Viscount and several officials warmed themselves by a fire, watching through the window as laborers loaded supplies from the warehouses onto wagons. With winter approaching, the stalemate between the kingdom's army and the rebels continued. The front lines were increasingly pressing for supplies from the rear. Both sides were now locked in a desperate struggle, waiting to see who would break first. Viscount Dillon had been busy for the past 2 days, finally managing to assemble a wagon train, which was then loaded with supplies overnight at the docks, ready to depart early the next morning. The fireplace burned brightly, warming the cabin. A pot sat atop the fire, simmering canned meat from the Northwest Bay. The Viscount and his officials ate a late-night snack, drank wine, and discussed recent events in the city. Gradually, the conversation turned to the horrific incident that had occurred in the harbor the day before, the assassination of Admiral Pike. It was considered horrific because its details were utterly unimaginable. Advent was approaching, and Admiral Pike had hosted a banquet at his home, inviting many close friends from the military, intending to drink to their heart's content. However, during the banquet, the unexpected happened. The specific details of the incident were officially suppressed, but due to the large number of people present, much information leaked out, spreading increasingly eerily throughout West Hill. Various rumors circulated, some even suggesting the involvement of witchcraft. An officer sitting next to Dillon said mysteriously, "My brother-in-law works as a guard at General Parker's mansion and witnessed the whole thing." "Do you want to know? Stop talking nonsense and tell us." The crowd's curiosity clearly outweighed the orders to keep the news under wraps. Even Dillon, the highest-ranking person there, tacitly allowed the officer to continue. Looking at his colleague's curious and eager eyes, the officer sighed contentedly and began to recount the events of that day in a low voice, though no one knew if he had embellished the story. That evening, just as the banquet reached its climax, 2 servants carried a whole roasted ox into the hall. This was the main course of the banquet, and the general and his guests came to distribute the meat on platters. As the crowd gathered, one of the servants carrying the ox suddenly broke into a sinister smile and shouted to General Pike, "General, Captain Edward has asked me to give you his regards." Before the crowd could react, the servant grabbed a butcher's knife and stabbed General Pike in the chest with lightning speed. The surrounding guests were stunned by the sudden assassination and didn't react immediately. The guards standing at the edge of the hall reacted quickly, drawing their weapons and rushing forward. But before they could reach him, the servant suddenly raised his hands and cried out, "Gentlemen, Captain Edward has also asked me to give you his regards." Then, an even more bizarre scene unfolded. The servant's entire body suddenly swelled up, soon becoming a huge ball of flesh. The crowd, sensing something terrible was about to happen, tried in terror to move away from him. With a loud thud, the bloated, unrecognizable ball of flesh suddenly exploded. At this point, the officer recounting the event wore a horrified expression, as if he had witnessed it firsthand. He described it in a chilling tone. "The explosion was so violent that even though my brother-in-law was some distance away, he felt the immense impact, as if an invisible hand had shoved him hard, sending him flying backwards." As the officer spoke, some of the more timid individuals trembled, gulping down drinks to calm their nerves. At first, he was completely disoriented from the explosion, seeing stars, and all he could hear was a constant ringing in his ears. He didn't know how long it took before he regained consciousness. When he got up, he saw that everything around him was a mess. Only the guards who hadn't rushed over yet and the guests who were some distance away were still standing in the hall. My brother-in-law was actually lucky, he only dislocated his arm. The closer someone was to that strange servant, the worse their condition was. But the most terrifying thing was, the entire hall was littered with human limbs and disgusting flesh, a veritable scene of hell. Many of the surviving women were driven mad with fear, screaming and shouting in terror. After the cleanup and investigation, the servant's body couldn't be pieced back together. It's estimated that he was reduced to minced meat in the explosion. After the official finished speaking, everyone swallowed hard in fear. Dillon almost vomited up the canned meat he had just eaten. The scene his subordinate described was just too shocking. So, the rumors about witchcraft circulating in the city were true. It seems so. There's no way they could have done that with normal methods. My friend in the Navy said they were in complete chaos. Because of this assassination attempt, Almost the entire high command of the Navy stationed at Zigan was wiped out. Those who survived are now bedridden. Amidst the discussions, someone suddenly pointed out the window and said, "Hey! Isn't there a fire over there?" The others also looked out the window and saw flames shooting into the sky in the distance. "That's towards the port?" Dylan was speechless. Why had Zigan been plagued by disasters these past few days? "Sir, should we go help put out the fire?" an official asked Dylan. It was evening, and they had manpower available. Dylan shook his head. "No, there are people specifically responsible for fire prevention at the port. Let's not add to the chaos. Let's do our own thing. Let's go out and see how much has been loaded and keep an eye on the laborers so they don't wander off." After everyone left the house, a commotion arose from the direction of the fire. At first, they thought it was firefighters shouting, but gradually they realized it was clearly shouts of battle. Panic grips everyone. "Everyone, stay calm. Officers, organize the laborers. No running around, no shouting," Dylan shouted to the city guard captain responsible for guarding the warehouse. "Captain Mark, have your guards on high alert. Anyone who moves is to be executed on the spot." Although he didn't know what was happening, it was definitely bad, and as the highest-ranking official in the warehouse district, he had to take responsibility. Under the guards' forceful suppression, the laborers finally quieted down. Dylan immediately sent someone to find out what was happening at the docks. Half an hour later, amidst everyone's anxious waiting, the scout returned. He was covered in blood and panting heavily. "Lord Dylan. Lord Mark. Something terrible has happened." "What happened?" Captain Mark grabbed him, pulled out a flask, and poured him several mouthfuls of wine. "Pirates. The pirates are attacking." Everyone was shocked. Chapter 337. Pirates? How could they be pirates? The officials were all astonished. The west coast of the royal domain had been free of pirates for a long time. Where had this group come from? The distant firelight grew brighter, suggesting the invaders were deliberately setting fires and encountering little resistance. "Sir, should we reinforce the troops stationed at the port?" Amidst the chaos, the city guard captain, Mark, remained relatively calm. Dylan replied, "Reinforce? Yes, we should reinforce," but he immediately changed his mind. "No, you and your men cannot leave. Our mission is to guard the warehouse district." He made up his mind and ordered, "Quickly, strengthen the defenses here. We can't let the pirates get here." "Yes, sir." Mark could only obey, noticing the Viscount's body trembling slightly. Although his words were resolute and calm, Dylan was actually panicking inside. He had never encountered such a situation before. Under Captain Mark's command, the city guards organized the laborers, blocked the street entrances, and built barricades, preparing for a possible assault. Of course, everyone prayed that the pirates would grab what they could and leave, not heading this way. However, Lady Luck was not on their side. The fire gradually spread towards them, and the clamor in the air grew increasingly intense. Shouts of battle and the screams of civilians mingled together, assaulting the psychological defenses of those behind the barricades wave after wave. Many were at a loss, obvious signs of panic appeared among the laborers, and even the soldiers stationed there were filled with fear, most of them having never experienced a life-or-death battle. Another scout sent out to gather intelligence rushed back, his chest heaving and panting heavily, reporting to Dylan, Mark, and the others, it's bad, the Navy over at the port, the Navy is finished." A chill ran through everyone, because Westport was a port city, and the Navy stationed there also served as the city's guard. The soldiers in the warehouse district were transferred from the Navy. The Navy's demise meant that the city had virtually no defensive capabilities, and the few outposts scattered throughout the city were practically useless. Dylan was both frightened and furious. Even if the higher-ups were paralyzed, these lower-ranking officers and soldiers were utterly useless. They'd been defeated so quickly. Had they become too complacent? As the highest-ranking official here, it was time to show some backbone. He took a deep breath and shouted to the men standing ready for battle, "Citizens of the kingdom. It's time to show our loyalty to His Majesty the King. We must defend this place to the death. Not even a single rebel can be taken by the pirates." He paused, silently thinking, "Damn pirates, go rob somewhere else, don't come here." Then he continued, "Citizens of the kingdom, clap clap clap." A burst of applause suddenly appeared, followed by a slightly mocking voice. "What an inspiring speech. What a loyal subject of the kingdom, who?" "Step forward." Dylan was furious, looking around for the source of the voice. There, on the roof, An officer beside him pointed upwards, reminding the Viscount. Dylan looked up immediately and saw a man standing on the roof of the building ahead. He was of medium build, dressed in black, and his hair fluttered gently in the night breeze. His appearance, coupled with the bright moon hanging in the night sky behind him, made him resemble a mysterious, elusive swordsman described in some novels. "You. Who are you?" Captain Mark quickly moved in front of Dylan, making a protective gesture, and suddenly drew his sword, pointing it at the man and shouting. His reaction was quite appropriate. "Me." The man in black smiled and answered unhurriedly, "I am the pirate the Viscount spoke of." Pirate. Everyone paled, not so much out of fear of the man's identity, but rather out of astonishment at his audacity, abandoning his companions and venturing here alone. "Damn it! You're courting death," Captain Mark roared in anger. The man on the roof was far too arrogant. He snatched a bow and arrow from one of his men and fired at the madman. "Die, you fool!" His words had barely left his lips when something astonished the crowd below occurred. Everyone saw the arrow strike the man in black with perfect accuracy, yet it seemed to have hit thin air, striking the roof tiles behind him. "Oh dear. Looks like this knight's aim isn't very good. He needs more practice." "Ha ha ha," the mysterious man in black sneered. "You. Nothing but a mere illusion." Captain Mark was furious, shouting to his men, "You lot, climb up and take down this madman." Several men frantically searched for ladders. The others stared at the man on the roof, their faces ashen. Some rubbed their eyes, seemingly unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Captain Mark's arrow had clearly struck the man's body. It hadn't been stopped by armor or any other protective gear, but had simply passed through naturally and without any obstruction, leaving the man completely unharmed. How could such an absurd thing happen? Witchcraft. Magic. These words suddenly flashed through everyone's minds. Recalling the mysterious assassination attempt on the naval leadership 2 days prior, yes, it must have been pirates colluding with a wizard to paralyze the Navy's command system before launching a surprise invasion amidst the chaos. And the person standing on the roof was a wizard. Nathan stood on the roof, smiling as he looked down at the panicked crowd. "Gentlemen," he began, "before your ladders arrive, shall we negotiate?" "Negotiation?" Dylan asked, puzzled. Nathan continued, "You seem to have quite a few good things hidden in your warehouses. How about this? You hand over everything in your warehouses to us, and your weapons too. Even a small amount is still something. In return, we'll let you leave safely." He clapped his hands loudly, seemingly applauding his idea. A win-win situation. What do you all think? "No way." Dylan was furious. Important supplies destined for the front lines had been stolen by pirates who appeared out of nowhere. He was sure to face dire consequences upon returning to the capital. "This is the property of the Kingdom of Waldo. Don't even think about touching a single hair." "Oh," Nathan narrowed his eyes, his smile still on his face, but a sinister look had crept over it. "Then don't blame us." As soon as he finished speaking, a dense sound of footsteps rang out, and a large number of figures suddenly appeared at the entrance of the street. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 338. In the capital city of Jingaeo, a tense yet joyful atmosphere permeated the streets and alleys. The Holy Advent Day was just days away, and every household was preparing for the festival. Merchants, large and small, took the opportunity to hawk their goods. For most, the rebellion in the south seemed distant, except for families with relatives serving in the army, who prayed for their loved ones' safety while welcoming the new year with anticipation. Inside the royal palace's council chamber, however, the atmosphere was starkly different from the celebrations outside. It was filled with seriousness and unease. News of the events in Westport had shaken the highest levels of the government in Jingaeo. King Rodney summoned his ministers, including Earl Rupert and Earl Merlin, to discuss countermeasures. However, their discussion focused solely on the assassination of a high-ranking naval officer stationed in Westport. They were completely unaware of what had happened afterward. Based on the existing investigation information, the servant who carried out the assassination that night, let's call it self-destruction and assassination for now, was an old servant who had served General Pike's mansion for many years. He was usually honest, hard-working, and didn't seem like the kind of person who would do something so crazy. Of course, that's not the most important thing. After all, You can only know a person's face, not their heart. He might have been coerced by irresistible factors, or he might have been tempted by huge profits. It's not too difficult to corrupt a person. The most important and most bizarre point is how a perfectly healthy person could suddenly explode, and kill a large number of people around him. How could he do that? It's truly unprecedented. The Westport government sent alchemists to investigate, but they didn't find any suspicious substances. As for the extent of the naval losses, that's secondary. The Alder Kingdom's navy was established long ago to eliminate pirates. After the pirates disappeared, only anti-smuggling tasks remained. The higher-ups had long wanted to find a reason to cut the navy and save money to strengthen the army. After discussing the matter for a long time, His Majesty the King and his ministers were still completely baffled. Rodney looked at Earl Merlin, who was in charge of intelligence. Lord Merlin, you've been silent all this time. Is there something on your mind? Earl Merlin paused for a moment, then quickly nodded slightly to the king and said, to be honest, Your Majesty, the situation in Westport reminds me of something that happened last year. Last year, everyone looked at Earl Merlin. The Earl looked around at everyone. Do you all remember the fire at the capital's granary last year? Of course we remember. The fire at the granary delayed the deployment of the pacification army by nearly a year, and the effort spent just procuring provisions was immense, something that everyone present remembered vividly. Merlin continued, the situation was like this. The usually diligent warehouse manager actually set the granary on fire, and the same thing happened in West Harbor. The usually loyal old servant became. The Earl hesitated for a moment. He couldn't help but connect the two events, becoming the tool of the murder. Rupert stroked his beard and pondered, you mean the same hand is behind it all? Earl Merlin nodded, that's right, and this hand possesses mysterious powers unknown to us, the attendees whispered amongst themselves. A year later, the core circle of the government knew the details of last year's granary fire investigation. The official in charge of managing the granary, Bart, was usually a cautious and responsible man, but the investigation revealed that his behavior at home had been quite strange in the period leading up to the fire. Suddenly, a side door to the council chamber opened, and a guard quietly entered, handing King Rodney a roll of paper. The king's heart skipped a beat. His intuition told him something bad had happened. Reluctantly, he slowly unfolded the letter. Amidst a clamor of discussion, only Rupert, who was closest to the king, noticed the king's change. The king's hands gripped the letter tightly, his shoulders trembling slightly. Your Majesty? Your Majesty? What has happened? Rupert called softly. Rupert, look for yourself. The Navy has. The Chancellor took the letter, and the information in the first two lines sent a storm through his mind. Pirates have invaded, the Navy has been annihilated. The Chancellor's hands trembled as he held the letter. The letter from Westport was quickly circulated among the assembled ministers. This is a conspiracy. Along with the assassination of the Naval High Command, this is definitely a series of interconnected plots. Alder has been invaded. Revenge, we must retaliate, Earl Merlin said. The west coast of the kingdom, at least the area directly under the royal domain, has been free of pirates for a long time. According to the information in this letter, the number of pirates invading this time could be as many as 1,000. Such a large pirate group could not have been formed quietly on the spot, they must have come from a very far place. Rupert agreed wholeheartedly. The Chancellor stroked his grey beard and said, the mastermind behind this may not necessarily be foreign. Judging from the current situation, the most suspicious person is Giles. His army is currently suffering increasing losses in the Führer region, and he may be planning some small-scale operations elsewhere. Moreover, his territory connects to Horn Bay, making it very easy for him to contact and hire pirate groups there. The letter was written by the mayor of Sihanoukville. According to him, after realizing the pirate invasion, and because the pirates were too powerful and the navy could not be relied upon, he had to lead the government officials, who represented the king's authority, to a town east of Sihanoukville to prevent them from being captured and humiliated. Currently, the pirates still occupy Sihanoukville and are sending small groups to plunder the surrounding areas from there. After much discussion, everyone agreed that the most important thing now was to organize an army to retake Sihanoukville and annihilate these damned pirates, or at least drive them back to sea. However, the kingdom's main army, under the command of Princess Catherine, was currently locked in a stalemate with Giles's rebels at Fragile. To organize an army, they would have to temporarily recruit soldiers. The king asked, Rupert, who do you think would be suitable to lead the army? The minister of the palace pondered for a moment, then thought of a candidate and replied, I believe Harrison Abbott, the eldest son of the Abbott family, is capable of this important task. Abbott? The Earl Abbott who married a prostitute? His son, Rodney's face flashed with reluctance. Your Majesty, these are extraordinary times, and Harrison's mother is also from a distinguished family, a pure-blooded noble. Sigh. All right, the king agreed. Chapter 339. To deal with the pirates entrenched in West Harbor, Jingaeo and its surrounding areas were urgently mobilized. The joyous atmosphere that had been preparing for Holy Advent was swept away, and the people cursed the damned pirates who had appeared out of nowhere. A force of nearly 3,000 men was organized, led by Harrison Abbott, the eldest son of the Abbott family, and prepared to march west to annihilate the pirates. Families whose members held positions in West Harbor united to petition the kingdom's government, urging His Majesty the King not to rush into battle after sending troops to West Harbor, as their loved ones' fates were still unknown, and they might still be suffering at the hands of the pirates. Of course, they were not against sending troops to fight the pirates, but they requested that the king first negotiate with the pirates regarding the ransom of their prisoners, and wait until they had redeemed their surviving relatives according to ancient tradition before engaging in battle. After all, pirates were only after money. To appease these people, King Rodney agreed to their request. On the morning before the army was scheduled to depart, the guards of Jingaeo sleepily opened the city gates, preparing to welcome the new day. Suddenly, they saw a thin horse carrying a man galloping towards the city gate in the distance. The guards sensed something was wrong and immediately raised their spears to stop the man, preparing to question him thoroughly. Let me through, the man gasped, looking utterly disoriented. I am Viscount Willin Dillon, His Majesty's envoy stationed in West Harbor. I have important matters to report to His Majesty. He was unshaven, and his body odor suggested he hadn't bathed in a month. Viscount Dillon. The guards were bewildered. They knew the Dillon family of Jingaeo was a considerable noble family, but the man's appearance was far from pleasant. And West Harbor, hadn't it been occupied by pirates? Where did this envoy come from? The guards insisted on handcuffing Willin Dillon first. Dillon, a nobleman, couldn't bear the humiliation and resisted fiercely. Having endured several unbearable days, he was emotionally charged and hurled insults at the city gate guards. Just as the enraged city gate guards drew their weapons, ready to fight, their commander noticed a commotion outside and came to investigate. The captain, also a nobleman, recognized Viscount Dillon and came to his rescue. Take me to His Majesty the King. Magic. Good heavens, they can use magic. Willin Dillon grabbed the sleeve of the city guard captain, pleading impatiently. The captain automatically ignored the nonsensical parts of Dillon's words, patting him on the shoulder. Brother Willin, relax. I'll find you a good horse to take you to the palace. But you can't go to see His Majesty looking like this. Take a good bath and change your clothes first. Half an hour later, Dillon, having hastily finished his bath, mounted one of the horses that had just been prepared, gave it a sharp spur, and rode off into the distance. Aren't you sure you don't want to go home first? The city guard captain shouted after him. Too late. After rushing to the kingdom, Viscount Dillon quickly obtained permission to see the king. Led by court attendants, he arrived at the king's council chamber. King Rodney's VI, along with Earl Rupert, Earl Merlin, and other ministers, were already seated inside. Upon learning that an official who had rushed back from West Harbor requested an audience with the king, Rodney, eager to know what had happened there, readily agreed. They stopped their discussion and waited for Dillon's arrival. Your Majesty, Dillon, somewhat nervous, bowed to Rodney. As an official of relatively low rank, he had only met the king a handful of times. No need for formalities. Bring a seat for the Viscount. Thank you, Your Majesty. Dillon hurriedly thanked him. Lord Dillon, how did you escape? What's the situation in West Harbor now? Dillon was somewhat embarrassed. Your Majesty, I was actually released by the pirates. They told me to bring back a message that a sufficient ransom must be paid before they would release prisoners of noble status. Then he pulled out a piece of paper, on which were clearly listed the prices of which family's sons, which was not unexpected for everyone. After all, they were pirates, let those families worry about it. What everyone was most concerned about was the strength of the pirates, and they wanted Dillon to explain the situation on the day of the fall. Fear appeared on Dillon's face. I am so eager to see Your Majesty to explain what I saw that night. The following words may be a bit incoherent, please forgive me, Your Majesty and all the officials, first, let me give you my personal opinion. We are not facing ordinary pirates, and we must be fully prepared to fight them." His words were somewhat incoherent, causing everyone to frown. On the night of the pirate invasion, because the front lines were pressing for action, I led the administrative officers and some of the city guards to direct the movement of supplies in the warehouse area overnight. After discovering the incident in the port area and learning that it was a pirate invasion, we immediately prepared for defense in the warehouse area, but a mysterious figure suddenly appeared before us. At this point, Dylan's pupils dilated slightly. Father in heaven. He was actually the legendary wizard, a wizard. Rodney and the ministers were very surprised. Recalling the grain warehouse fire and the naval assassination case discussed a few days ago, now someone had come into contact with a mysterious? Yes, Your Majesty, gentlemen, I swear to the Lord of Light, I am absolutely not lying, and I am absolutely not mistaken. When he appeared, Captain Mark shot him with an arrow. Although it hit his chest, the arrow passed right through his body, as if he had shot a phantom. Hearing Dylan's description, everyone's faces became even more solemn. The pirates followed closely behind, and we refused their unreasonable demands. Suddenly, a fireball appeared where the guards were gathered. Everyone looked at each other in bewilderment. Earl Merlin asked, "You're not mistaken, are you? Perhaps there was a torch already there." "No." A slightly distraught denial escaped Dylan's lips. He covered his head with his hands, saying in a somewhat terrified tone, "I'm absolutely not mistaken. It just appeared so suddenly, it just appeared out of thin air. I'm absolutely not mistaken. I'm absolutely not mistaken." Dylan's last words seemed to be a soliloquy. Everyone looked at him with some sympathy. This young nobleman seemed to have suffered a considerable mental shock. Then it got bigger and bigger, and then, bang, it exploded, because they were so densely packed. Most of the soldiers fell on the spot, and even I, standing at a distance, was affected. At that moment, one side of my body was burning with pain, my ears were ringing violently, I couldn't hear anything, I only saw a dense swarm of pirates rushing towards us. That's my last memory of that night. Dylan continued to recount his subsequent experiences, including being tortured by the pirates to extract information, and how he was released and brought back to deliver the ransom message. After the young Viscount finished speaking, the council hall fell silent. Finally, the king himself broke the silence. "Gentlemen, we can now assert that the legend has become reality. The kingdom of Waldo has encountered an enemy it has never faced before, an enemy that is completely unknown and completely unfamiliar to us." Chapter 340. On the eve of Advent, a banquet was held at the Lord's Manor in Lake Town. Paul invited important figures from the military and political departments to gather and celebrate the approaching new year. According to custom, as the Lord, he was to give a speech at the beginning of the banquet. Everyone saw the Lord holding a piece of paper, staring intently at it as he read aloud its contents. Actually, the article was quite good. Those who worked around Paul could easily recognize it as being written by his chief secretary, Baron Bernard Francis. In terms of language alone, it praised everyone's hard work over the past year with ornate yet understated language, passionately introducing the significant achievements in the territory, including agriculture, industry, and commerce, and highlighting the major victory in the War of the Usurpers. This victory not only destroyed the long-standing major threat posed by the Kent family to the territory, but also brought the rich land of Emden under the jurisdiction of the council, bringing more people, more wealth, more raw materials, and a larger market. More importantly, this war significantly altered the Gleman family's awkward position in the Northwest Bay. It not only enhanced their reputation but also forged solid friendships with the Parker and Heller families, and even the newly crowned Duke of the Northwest, Henry Ferdinand, forming a de facto community of interests. In particular, the Northwest Industries, initiated by Arda and jointly participated in by the Lords, what Paul called the Arms Company, continuously supplied the kingdom's army with inexpensive yet high-quality weapons. This not only brought the Northwest Bay, once considered a barren land, into the view of the kingdom's high command for the first time, but also generated gold coins that benefited all the lords of the Northwest, further elevating Arda's image among the lords. However, the grand history of development, once spoken by the Lord, sounded as bland as plain water to everyone else. This was an ordeal for both sides. Finally, after reciting the last word, Paul, as if granted a pardon, announced the start of the banquet, and the atmosphere in the hall instantly became lively. "Fantastic," Your Excellency. Your speech was truly inspiring. After Paul fled back to his seat, Hansel clapped at him with a grin. Paul rolled his eyes at Hansel and ignored him. The man was clearly mocking him. Your Excellency really needs to work on your art of public speaking, Eileen said helplessly. She had seen her father's powerful voice when summoning ministers in court, and her sister's impassioned speeches in the army. Compared to them, Paul's speech was utterly lacking. It lacked intonation and pauses where they should have. It's already very good, the Count said, quite satisfied with his own performance. At least you didn't mispronounce a single word. He recalled his experiences on Earth. In front of leaders or crowds, even when reading from a prepared script, he would inevitably make mistakes, his mind would gradually go blank, and he wouldn't even know what he had said. Paul was surrounded by key figures from the State Council and the military. They met frequently and were no longer reserved, enjoying fine food and wine while engaging in lively conversation. Among them was Admiral Austin, the naval commander who had come all the way from Fuelinport. Halfway through the drinks, he suddenly slapped his forehead, somewhat annoyed, and said, I was so engrossed in drinking that I almost messed things up. He stood up and walked to Eileen's side, a curious look in the education director's eyes. Austin carefully took out an envelope and handed it to Eileen. Miss Betty, this letter was entrusted to you by someone while our fleet was in Westport. The sender claims to be from the royal capital, Jingaeo, and a relative of yours, Jingaeo? Eileen's heart skipped a beat. She exchanged a glance with her assistant, Leah, both seeing the question in each other's eyes. Since it was from Jingaeo, it was most likely her parents or sister. Did they know she was in the Northwest Bay? Miss Betty? Miss Betty, Austin called out to Eileen when he saw her stunned expression. Oh, okay, thank you, Eileen snapped out of her daze and hurriedly replied, standing up to take the envelope with both hands. She nervously handed the letter to Leah for safekeeping, giving Leah a scrutinizing look at the end. Leah, who was both assistant and bodyguard, felt a pang of anxiety. Could Her Highness the Princess suspect me of tipping off Jingaeo? Paul asked with interest. Betty, you have relatives in Jingaeo too. Then he immediately realized, oh, I'm sorry, I was confused, haha. He suddenly remembered the surname, Diash. The current queen was also from the Diash family of the Gabella Empire, wasn't that obvious? Haha, that's how it is, Eileen smiled somewhat awkwardly. She had only blurted out her mother's surname in a moment of panic. It seemed Count Gleman now truly considered her a member of the Gabella Diash family. Oh well, let it be. Eileen and Leah spent the entire banquet with mixed feelings. After the banquet, Eileen hurriedly took Leah back to their residence and immediately interrogated her female guard and assistant. Of course, Eileen had no doubt about the guard's loyalty, but even for reasons of loyalty, Leah might have informed the capital, as most people wouldn't consider it a good thing for a princess to be wandering for so long. Based on her judgment, Eileen concluded that the guard hadn't informed the capital. So who had found out her current location? Eileen pondered this but couldn't figure it out, so she turned her attention to the letter, a deep homesickness welling up inside her. During the banquet, she excused herself for a while, secretly reading the letter several times in a secluded spot. She didn't recognize the handwriting, but the style of the sentences easily identified it as her mother's. Perhaps to avoid being seen, the entire letter used pronouns like you and I, revealing no specific identity information. The letter poured out her longing for Eileen, complained about her stubborn refusal to return, and repeatedly emphasized that she wouldn't force Eileen to compromise on her marriage. Finally, she pleaded with Eileen to return home as soon as possible, preferably before Holy Advent. This letter brought tears to Eileen's eyes, and it took her a long time to compose herself before daring to return to her seat at the banquet. Miss, we have indeed been away from home for a long time. It's time to go back and see us, Leah advised Eileen after reading the letter. Hearing this, Eileen felt a surge of intense guilt. The other woman had stayed with her for nearly 2 years in an unfamiliar place without complaint, but she also had her own family. Finally, Eileen wiped her eyes, her longing for her family overcoming everything else. She grasped the maid's hand and said, "You're right, Leah, we should go home and see us." Chapter 341. What? You're going to Jingaeo? Paul was taken aback. He had just sat down in his office when Betty, the education director, came to him with an unexpected request to visit relatives in Jingaeo. Yes, Paul. Eileen's tone was hesitant, and she seemed somewhat embarrassed. I know my work right now is quite important, But I still have to go to Jingaeo? Paul asked. Is it because of that letter from Jingaeo? Your relatives in the capital want you to go. Eileen nodded slightly. Okay. How long will it take, going there and back, plus the time spent with your relatives? Eileen hesitated greatly because she wasn't sure if she could still leave Jingaeo. Even if she could escape, her personal feelings were complicated. She had only run away from home to escape her father's forced arrangements. If her mother hadn't lied to her, the premise for running away was no longer there. Come to think of it, her initial plan was merely to temporarily stay in the Northwest Bay. Although she had her favorite career here. A little over a month, she casually suggested. She couldn't tell the Earl her true feelings yet. What if he wouldn't let her leave? Alright, then I'll give you a month and a half's leave. Oh dear, such a long time. I'm really going to miss you. Paul was somewhat helpless. After controlling such a large area of Emden, he still had plans to build several new schools. He needed to hurry up and brainwash the next generation of Emden. He needed to hurry up and cultivate the correct values in the next generation of Emden. If Miss Betty wasn't there, the plans would have to be postponed. Then, Paul, while I'm gone, I recommend Laddie to take over the position. Knowing she was leaving and might not return, Eileen was somewhat unwilling to give up her civilization project in the Northwest Bay. A year and a half ago, in her eyes, the Northwest Bay was still a sparsely populated, ignorant, and uncivilized borderland, with only one crooked school set up by the Lord on a whim in the entire Arda. And now? Compared to before, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say it was a flourishing of diverse talents. Eileen believed she deserved a large share of the credit, and because of this, she was particularly dedicated to the work and strived to expand its achievements. Although she was leaving now, she was determined to continue this endeavor, so she chose Laddie Sisha, whom she trusted most. I accept your recommendation. After all, you are the two most educated people in my territory. Hearing a new term, Eileen asked curiously, education? What's that? Paul shrugged. It's a person's level of education. Aren't you and Laddie both legitimate scholars? Oh, right, you studied at the Academy Tower. That's true. Paul's words made Eileen feel a little proud, but this quickly turned into guilt. Should she be honest with him? I might not come back. After all, the person before her had entrusted her with a significant responsibility. So many people had opposed it, but Paul had withstood the pressure and put her in charge of education. He trusted her so much? Have I let him down? Paul, what? No, nothing. I have to go back now. I need to hand over my work to Lottie. Eileen shook her head, ultimately not saying anything. Okay, take care. Eileen turned and walked out, turning back at the door to ask, I'm planning to take a new merchant ship south by sea. What do you think? I think it's fine. It's been operating for so long without a single accident. Oh, okay. Eileen turned, closed the door, and left the office. Paul lowered his head, continuing to work on the pile of documents on his desk. Unexpectedly, just as he finished reading a report, the office door was pushed open with a bang. Who is it this time? The beautiful figure of the education director reappeared. Betty, is there anything else? I wanted to say, Eileen stammered, I will definitely come back. She was determined to find an opportunity to visit the Northwest Bay again, even if it wasn't in a month, and even if it wasn't in her current capacity. Paul was now a little confused. The other person's tone sounded like a farewell. Suddenly, a possibility occurred to him, and an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. After a long silence, Paul stood up, walked to Eileen, looked into her eyes, and gently asked, is this relative someone you absolutely have to visit? Eileen nodded. Is there any difficulty? Oh. I mean, what difficulties might you encounter on the way? Eileen shook her head. Alright, Paul nodded. Think it over carefully before you leave, and don't hesitate to ask if you need any help. Eileen lowered her head. Yes, thank you. Paul smiled and said, I believe what you said earlier. Although your position is being held by someone else, I will keep it for you. Relax and have fun at Jingaeo. Hearing Paul's words, and seeing him like this, Eileen suddenly blushed, a feeling she couldn't quite explain welling up inside her. Thank you. After saying this, Eileen walked away without looking back. 3 days later, Paul, accompanied by Laddie, saw Eileen and Leo off. He arranged a carriage to take them to Port Flander, from where they would board a merchant ship heading south. After waving goodbye, Eileen watched the receding lakeside town and Paul and Laddie still gazing at them from afar, a sudden wave of reluctance washing over her. Was it work-related? She had already handed over the duties, and with Laddie's abilities, she was perfectly capable of handling the job. Hell, if she were to be away for an extended period, Paul would probably arrange for her to officially take over. Was it her friendship with Laddie Sisha? Indeed, she was one of her closest confidants besides her bodyguard Leah, and a sudden departure was truly heartbreaking. But she had also given her one of the communication methods from Crystal Radiance, so they could correspond in the future. And she could still find her using this address, although she would certainly be quite surprised when they actually met. So, what else could it be? Yes, there was definitely something else. As the carriage gradually disappeared from sight, Laddie asked Paul, "Aren't you going to try to stop her?" "Try to stop her? What do you mean?" "She's just taking a month and a half off to visit relatives in the capital." The female advisor's words brought a certain worry to Paul's surface, and he suddenly felt uneasy, but he didn't want to think about it any further. Laddie frowned and said, "I have a bad feeling." "Don't say that," Paul interrupted her. "Betty isn't my slave. What right do I have to stop her from visiting relatives?" "All right, I hope my worries are unnecessary." Laddie fell silent. Sigh. A runaway girl arrives in the Northwest Bay in an abnormal way. Perhaps, maybe, or perhaps she'll eventually return to where she belongs. Sorry, I've been a bit busy with work lately. Chapter 342 Shocking News. Just as dawn broke, the tranquility of the morning was shattered by the rapid sound of hoofs. The rider anxiously spurred his horse, galloping through the streets of Lake Town. Fortunately, most residents were still asleep, and the streets were deserted. The rider quickly crossed a bridge and arrived at the old town on the island in the lake. With the expansion of its territory and Paul's daily refinement of his bureaucracy based on his memories of his past life, Arden's administrative system had also expanded rapidly. Many institutions had established independent offices. Due to the natural isolation of the island, surrounded by the lake, it possessed unparalleled advantages in terms of secrecy and security. Furthermore, Lord Paul's castle was located there, so most government offices were built on the island. The island's residents were mainly officials and their families. As for the original inhabitants of Lake Town, they had long since happily received their relocation compensation from the government and moved to new homes on the South Bank. The new houses provided by the government were larger, newer, and more comfortable. In this era of unparalleled lordly authority, no one dared to be a holdout. In fact, when the island's residents learned that the government would not only build them new houses but also give them a sum of money, not a lot, of course, their shock was palpable, and they all knelt down, shouting "Long live the Lord!" The rider continued to whip his horse, walking along the street to the entrance of the intelligence department's office. Suddenly, he remembered that the intelligence department was not yet open at this time, so he turned his horse around and galloped off again. The rider quickly arrived at the residence of the intelligence director, Cecil, jumped off his horse, and pounded on the door. Cecil's servant grumbled as he opened the door to receive the uninvited guest. 20 minutes later, Cecil, disheveled, rushed out of the house, mounted the horse still tied at the door, and galloped towards the Lord's mansion. "What's the matter? Why the rush?" Paul yawned, still sleepy. He had just been having a sweet dream in bed when he was suddenly dragged out by Butler Philip. On such a cold winter morning, what kind of suffering was this? "Your Excellency, shocking news has arrived from Crystal Radiance." Cecil handed Paul a document. "You must immediately send someone to inform Port Fulton to stop all merchant ships about to depart south." "News from Crystal Radiance? What does it have to do with merchant ships?" Paul took the document with a puzzled look, sensing something terrible from Cecil's anxious expression. Sure enough, when he opened the document, the words that met his eyes made his heart skip a beat. "Pirates have launched a surprise attack on Westport, wiping out the entire kingdom's naval force stationed there." After a few seconds of stunned silence, he remembered Cecil's earlier suggestion. He summoned a servant and instructed, "Quickly, send a telegram to Mayor Theodore and Commander Austin of Port Fulton, instructing them to stop all ships heading south, saying they might encounter pirates." "Yes, Your Excellency," Paul added. "Have the Navy call back any ships that haven't gone far. Use plain language, the sooner the better." The servant turned and hurried out. Paul and Cecil immediately convened an emergency meeting of the military and political leaders of Lacahurt to discuss countermeasures. Whether heading south to Alder or to Horn Bay, Westport was a crucial target port or supply depot. If it fell into the hands of a hostile force, it would be a stranglehold on the increasingly maritime-dependent Northwest Bay. "Your Excellency," You should immediately dispatch the navy to reclaim Westport for the kingdom, Hansel exclaimed excitedly upon hearing the news. HMPH. Your Excellency, Minister of Agriculture, you don't understand military matters, it's best you keep your mouth shut, Bryce sneered. He and many other local military and political officials of the Northwest Bay were deeply dissatisfied with Hansel. Whenever the kingdom was in trouble, this guy disregarded Alder's interests, impatiently demanding that the Earl do this and that. Did he ever consider what real benefits the title of Royal Commissioner had brought him? Who paid his salary? Earl Gleman? Or King Rodney? The two argued, further agitating Paul. Lady Sisha, standing beside him, quietly tugged at his clothes and whispered, Betty sent me a telegram 2 days ago saying her merchant ship is about to depart. That means her ship has been gone for 2 days. Paul's face darkened. Laddie asked nervously, can the Navy's galleons catch up? Paul said worriedly, merchant ships are slow in carrying cargo, they should be able to catch up. God help us, the meeting continued, and when the topic of whether to send troops south came up, Chief of Staff Schroeder reported on the Navy's situation. Your Excellency, the two earliest commissioned sailing warships, the Hope and the South, are undergoing major repairs in Franklin Harbor. We currently have 12 galleons and 6 other sailing warships available for deployment, including 2 newly commissioned square-hulled ships. Major repairs? Why? The Hope and the South were just built 2 years ago? Oh, because we were eager to test the practicality of the sailing ships. The timber used to build them wasn't properly dried, which caused the hulls to erode very quickly. Alright, I understand. So, our fighting strength is temporarily significantly reduced? Not quite, Paul said. The 2 newly commissioned Bimisks are larger and more heavily armed. They're equipped with 2 rows of 12-pound cannons on their sides, capable of riddling enemy warships with bullets from afar. They are a bit slower, but only relative to schooners. Paul breathed a sigh of relief. That puts my mind at ease. After much discussion, the group decided they couldn't let the maritime trade routes be cut off, as Arden's economy heavily relied on exports. At the military's suggestion, the first priority was to ascertain the strength of the pirates entrenched in West Harbor. Pirates capable of annihilating the kingdom's naval forces couldn't be ordinary pirates. Furthermore, maintaining contact with the kingdom's army was crucial. If the pirates were too powerful, it would be unwise for the Arden Navy to challenge them alone, and the kingdom's government couldn't allow such a dangerous force to wreak havoc along its coast. The meeting's outcome delighted Hansel, who volunteered to go to Jingai-ao to contact His Majesty's government. Everyone knew his motives, if he acted as their representative. The important figures at Jingai-ao would easily assume he was the one who facilitated the Arden Navy's loyalty to the Emperor, thus giving him even greater respect. Seeing Hansel's enthusiasm, Paul simply agreed to his request. However, Hansel insisted on traveling south by land, refusing to board a naval warship, partly due to his lack of experience with long-distance sea voyages, and partly out of fear of potential pirate encounters. To save time, he decided to depart the next day. The specific naval operations would be discussed after the commanders of Fuel and Port arrived. Privately, Paul also worried about Betty, silently praying that her ship would be recovered. Chapter 343 Arrival in Sihanoukville. The Fortune was a cargo ship belonging to Todd Shipping Company. It was a brand new 2-masted sailing ship with a bulky hull and 2 decks. It traveled between Fuel and Port and Westport, carrying cargo and usually some passengers. Compared to the rudimentary facilities on the Hope and South, the accommodations on the Fortune were relatively better. In addition to the captain's cabin, there were several small compartments for passengers to rest. Ordinary sailors did not enjoy this treatment. They slept in bunk beds in the cabins and had to take turns resting. In such a prime location, ordinary people could not afford compartments. They could only squeeze into the dark, damp, and indescribably smelly hold, which was completely below the waterline, with conditions comparable to those on smuggling ships in later generations. What a terrible journey! Leah clutched her chest with one hand and held on to the ship's railing with the other, her delicate face pale. She had just vomited again, and although she had eaten a little in the morning, her stomach was empty again. Eileen gently massaged her back, her face full of concern. "Ah, you've really suffered with me." The first day after boarding the Fortune was fine, but on the second day, her bodyguard, Leah, began to suffer from seasickness. Fortunately, due to strict orders from the State Council, each merchant ship had to be equipped with a doctor. Under the doctor's care, Leah's seasickness symptoms lessened somewhat, but it was still intermittent. Eileen looked apologetic. I'm sorry for making you suffer so much with me. Leah frowned. What are you saying, miss? Since leaving Alda, her speech had gradually reverted to the serious and rigid tone she used when serving as a princess's bodyguard in the palace. Serving one's lord is a knight's most basic duty, and facing adversity is a necessary trial on the path of a knight. Before she could finish speaking, Leah covered her mouth. Really, you should stop lecturing. Eileen continued to gently massage her back. What a loyal subordinate, a voice of praise came from the deck. Eileen recognized the voice as that of another passenger on the Fortune, the merchant Varus. Varus claimed to be from Westport and had been based in Lakeside Town since last year, traveling on the Fortune to his hometown for business. However, Eileen and Leah felt that Varus and his men were always intentionally or unintentionally circling around them. Were they just being paranoid? After all, the ship was small, it was normal to bump into each other frequently, and they hadn't noticed anything unusual about them along the way. Even if Varus had ill intentions, the two women weren't afraid. The captain and first mate of the Fortune knew Eileen's identity, a subordinate of Paul Gleman and a high-ranking official in the government. Under Mayor Theodore's instructions, they naturally paid extra attention to their safety. Upon arrival in Westport, they would be escorted to the city hall. Of course, they didn't know what Eileen was going to the city hall for. A middle-aged man with a prosperous appearance, dressed as a merchant, approached. Eileen turned to thank Velas. Thank you for your compliment, Mr. Velas. Are you here at the stern again to enjoy the scenery? Haha, yes. Admiring the vast ocean from a ship is something we inlanders don't often experience. Speaking of which, female knights are quite rare. Since your squire is a knight, you must be a nobleman. Right. Eileen frowned almost imperceptibly, then nodded in acknowledgement. I suppose I could be considered a nobleman. You could be considered a nobleman? Haha, I didn't expect someone of your high status to be so humble, Velas said familiarly. Just then, Eileen saw someone approaching from behind Velas. Captain, Miss Diaz, so you're here. The captain of the Fortune waved, and the three, including Velas, nodded slightly in greeting. The captain came to their side and gently removed his hat. The captain appeared quite reserved in Eileen's presence. When his boss, Mr. Todd, informed him that the renowned female executive of the State Council was traveling south on his ship, he was filled with anxiety, fearing something might happen on the journey that would be difficult to explain. He had been cautious throughout the trip, and thanks to the Lord of Light's protection, apart from the maid being a little seasick, nothing else had happened. Miss Leah, are you feeling better? Thank you for your concern. I'm not feeling as bad as before. That's good. A few more trips and you'll get used to it. The captain glanced at Varus standing beside him, inwardly grumbling. Why is this guy bothering Miss Diaz again? Is he some kind of toad trying to eat a swan? I came specifically to inform you ladies that we'll be arriving at Westport soon. Stand on the deck for a little while longer, and you'll see the port on the horizon. Really? That's wonderful. Eileen and Leah exchanged a glance, both seeing the excitement in each other's eyes. Finally, they were about to set foot on their long-lost homeland. Although the first time she was sailing at sea was exciting, the continuous voyage for so many days had become tedious, especially since Leah was seasick. Look! It's Westport, came the shouts of the crew from ahead. We're home. The two women happily hugged each other and then ran excitedly towards the bow. Velas watched their backs, a smile appearing on his face. The Fortune gradually approached the port, and the captain shaded his eyes with his hand, peering into the harbor. It's strange, there aren't any ships coming or going. Although Westport isn't exactly prosperous, this quietness is also unusual. A strange feeling gradually rose in the captain's heart. Years of seafaring had forged his caution, and the captain inexplicably recalled the pirates, big and small, who had roamed the Northwest Bay 2 years ago. Could there be pirates lying in ambush in the port? But the pirates in this area have disappeared for a long time. In the end, the captain decided to be cautious and loudly ordered, "Stop approaching the port." Although his subordinates found it strange, they quickly relayed his order. Soon, the first mate, second mate, and other key figures on board approached the captain, who explained his concerns. The crew reacted differently. Some advocated continuing into port, while others insisted on turning back north. What's wrong with them? We're almost at shore, why aren't they continuing? Eileen wondered, sensing something amiss. I'll go ask them, Leah said, walking towards the captain and the others, Eileen quickly following. Ladies, something seems amiss in West Harbor. I suspect there are pirates. Pirates? Weren't the pirates on the kingdom's west coast wiped out? At least, there haven't been any reports of pirates along the coast of the royal domains for a long time. We're also hesitant. Just then, a crew member shouted, "Captain, a ship has emerged from West Harbor and is heading towards us." Everyone looked towards West Harbor and saw a small oarboat slowly approaching. Chapter 344 Escaping the Tiger's Den. Notify the entire ship to be on high alert. The captain of the Fortune frowned, ordering the crew to prepare. He turned to Eileen and the others, saying, "Guests, you should go back to your cabins." Eileen shook her head, saying, "If they really are pirates, and you can't stop them, it's no use hiding anywhere." She patted the sword at her waist. For convenience, she and Leah had been dressed as men since boarding the ship, and said, "We know a little swordsmanship. It might be helpful in a conflict." Leah nodded. Not only was she the princess's guardian knight, but the princess herself had received excellent swordsmanship instruction and training from a young age, and was quite confident in her skills. With a sharp blade in hand, ordinary people couldn't get close. Otherwise, the two girls wouldn't have dared to run away from home so easily. All right, the captain of the Fortune nodded suspiciously. "Since the girls are willing to face danger, wouldn't it be a laughingstock for us grown men to hide in the cabin?" said the merchant Velas. The other passengers echoed Velas's sentiments, expressing their willingness to stay on deck and share the hardship. "All right, thank you all." In that case, the captain, emboldened, ordered his crew to distribute weapons to the unarmed passengers. The small boat that had emerged from West Harbor gradually approached the Fortune. The captain roughly estimated that there were about 10 people, including the oarsmen. His own ship had more than 50 men. This small boat posed no real threat. However, if they were indeed pirates, there were certainly more of their accomplices in West Harbor. He ordered the men on deck to hide their weapons. "I am the port officer in charge, requesting permission to board," a man who appeared to be the leader shouted to the deck as they approached the Fortune. "Yes, please wait a moment," the captain agreed, ordering the rope ladder to be lowered. The port officer who had spoken earlier climbed aboard with several attendants. "Where did you come from?" The captain frowned and replied, "The Fortune from Northwest Bay. We've been to SYNOPSIS several times already and registered at the port office." "Don't you recognize it, sir?" The captain's suspicion turned into worry. The shape of a sailing ship was very unique to the people of SYNOPSIS, and it should have been easily recognizable. How could the port officials here not recognize it? Upon hearing the Fortune's captain's question, the man claiming to be the port authority chuckled awkwardly. "I'm sorry, I'm newly transferred to Westport and not very familiar with some things yet." Then, his expression turned serious, and he asked in a questioning tone, "You're anchored so close to Westport but not going in. What's your intention? Are you perhaps trying to spy on the port? Or even the kingdom's navy?" No, sir," the Fortune's captain quickly explained. "Actually, our rudder is broken. We want to try and fix it before entering the port." "Oh, the rudder is broken." The port authority stroked his chin. "Well then, don't linger on the water. Take advantage of the wind and move towards Westport. Once we're close, we'll send someone to tow your ship in. Wouldn't it be easier to repair it in the dock? There are many skilled craftsmen in Westport. Even a new type of ship like yours is no problem." "Haha, then thank you for your trouble, sir." The captain feigned gratitude. Suddenly, Devilis spoke up. "Port Authority officer, please give my regards to your colleague, Mr. Jefferson. I have some acquaintance with him, and I'll stop by Westport to visit him." He extended his hand as he spoke. The Port Authority officer shook his hand, smiling broadly, and replied, "Oh, it's that fellow Jefferson. Don't worry, I'll pass on your greetings." Without further ado, the Port Authority officer quickly led his entourage onto a small boat and rowed towards Westport. "Captain," Velas suddenly said seriously to the captain of the Fortune, "turn around immediately and get far away from West Harbor. Jefferson is a name I made up. Surely there isn't actually a port official like that in West Harbor? Besides, when I shook hands with him just now, I could clearly feel the thick calluses on his hands. He didn't seem like someone who did clerical work. In conclusion, something must be wrong in West Harbor." The captain nodded coldly. "I was already thinking of turning around and leaving. With your speculation, I'm even more determined." The captain quickly gave the order to sail north. Under the threat of the pirates, the sailors worked with far greater efficiency than usual. The wind was from the north. They adjusted the angle of the hull and sails, splitting the wind force into two directions, one pushing the hull sideways, and the other pushing the bow. The sideways force was offset by the water resistance of the hull, while the other force propelled the hull forward. And so, the Fortune slowly began to move, zigzagging northwards. This maneuver was quite time-consuming, but the port official who had boarded earlier probably thought his performance had fooled everyone on board and was smugly waiting for his prey to come to him, so he didn't take any further action. However, once the Fortune turned north, they finally realized that they had been tricked, not the other way around. After a flurry of activity, several large ships set sail from the western port in pursuit of the Fortune. But because the Fortune was already quite far from the port, the galleys ultimately failed to catch up. What should we do next? Eileen asked, somewhat bewildered, watching the ship's silhouette recede into the distance to the south. Her journey home had turned out this way, and she felt deeply disappointed. Moreover, the appearance of pirates on the kingdom's west coast made her, as a princess, worry about the fate of her kingdom. The captain explained his plan. The food and fresh water on board aren't enough to last us until we return to the Northwest Bay. So we must head north to find a supply point, Velas suggested. There are several ports along the west coast. They can't all be occupied by pirates like Westport. Obtaining supplies should be easy. The captain stroked his chin. Now that you mention it, it reminds me. Finding a nearby port to unload the cargo is better than transporting it all the way back to the Northwest Bay. However, we need to send men ashore in small boats to scout out the situation in this area. As the sun set, dinner was prepared on the Fortune. After eating, everyone spent the night with mixed feelings. The next morning, the captain sent men ashore and learned from a fishing village that Westport had indeed been attacked by a group of pirates who seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, and even the kingdom's navy station there had been wiped out. Crystal Radiance was now mobilizing ships and recruiting sailors, preparing to wipe out the pirates by land and sea. The crew was filled with lingering fear. They had almost walked into the lion's den. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 345 Tracking. Let's part ways here, Captain. On a street in a small coastal town, Eileen bid farewell to the captain of the Fortune. Miss Diaz, are you sure you don't need me to send someone to escort you? He watched speechlessly as the two young ladies, who should have been delicate and refined, each led a tall horse. After disembarking in this town, Miss Diaz bought 2 fast horses and matching attire, transforming herself and her attendants into dashing female riders. Coupled with her earlier claim on the ship that she was skilled in swordsmanship, this was a far cry from the image of the education director the captain had in mind. Nevertheless, the captain was still uneasy about letting the 2 girls leave on their own. What if something happened? Would the Lord blame me? This worry lingered deep within him. Captain, really, no need. Thank you for your help along the way. Leah and I are familiar with this area. We know people in the towns along the way who can help us. You still need to organize people to transport the goods to their destination, so we can't trouble you any further. Eileen's weapon, though seemingly friendly, also revealed a firm resolve. Oh, alright, then please be careful on your journey, and have a safe trip. The captain confirmed that they truly did not wish to accept help. Thank you, and best of luck to you as well. Goodbye. Eileen and Leah mounted their horses, waved goodbye to the captain and the others, and left the town. In the year or so since we left home, so many great things have happened in the kingdom. After traveling for half a day, Eileen suddenly sighed as she rode her horse. The siege of Thorn Fortress, the Duke of the East's restless ambitions, the standoff with Feudal, and the recent pirate invasion. Our kingdom has truly suffered so much. Eileen suddenly choked up. While father and sister were working so hard, I actually hid in the Northwest Bay. She even wondered if she regretted running away from home. Lena quickly came over to comfort her. Your Highness, you weren't hiding in the Northwest Bay. Earl Gleman was able to provide so many supplies to the kingdom's army, and you deserve some credit for that. Think of all the schools you've run. How many talents have you nurtured for the Earl? Eileen shook her head and said, don't flatter me. Paul often says, it takes 10 years to grow a tree, but 100 years to cultivate a person. Alda's education system is only just beginning. We won't see any results in the short term. She gave a self-deprecating laugh. I guess it's not even as good as Hansel's. At least he can recruit a large number of literate people from the capital. She was about to continue when Leah suddenly made a shushing gesture. What is it? Leah said solemnly. Your Highness, prepare your weapons. As she spoke, she drew her sword. Eileen's face turned cold. Her mood, already bad, worsened now. HMPH, are there any scoundrels? She touched the hidden dart strapped to her arm, a gift from Laddie before her departure, meant for self-defense on the road. Leah glanced behind her. Did you notice the group behind us? At first, I didn't think anything of it, but I just realized they seem to be following us. Could they just be going the same way? Even if they are, we go fast, they go fast, we slow down, they slow down, maintaining a distance that's neither too close nor too far. What's going on? You're right. Reminded by the female guard, Eileen also became alert. The two women didn't urge their mounts to gallop. Instead, they turned their horses around and stood still, seriously watching the people following them. The group of 8, seeing the women's actions, knew they had aroused the other side's suspicion and stopped as well. The two sides stared at each other from several dozen meters apart, the atmosphere becoming strangely tense. After a standoff of over a minute, Leah finally couldn't take it anymore. Your Highness, I'll go ask them. I'll go with you. No, you should stay here. If they make a move, right away immediately. Eileen narrowed her eyes, saying with a hint of mockery, huh? A few petty thieves and you've forced your lord to run first? Has your year-long teaching career really made you degenerate to this extent? My female knight, sigh. Alright, Leah knew the little princess's temper. Eileen wasn't too worried about the female guard. The people on the other side were all dressed in civilian clothes, and she didn't see any swords or other weapons. The martial arts gap between knights and civilians was no joke. Even if Leah, as a woman, was weaker than those men in strength, as long as they didn't get close, a female knight who had received martial arts training since childhood and wielded a longsword was not someone that bandits of humble origins could handle. However, to their surprise, the group on the other side actually rushed towards them first. Leah gripped her horse's flanks tightly, her longsword pointing diagonally to the ground, ready for action. Eileen raised her arm, pointing her superior hidden dart at the enemy. The leader waved frantically, shouting, "Don't misunderstand, we're on the same side, on the same side." Huh? That voice sounds familiar. Eileen was a little puzzled, but she didn't lower the hidden dart. As they drew closer, Leah demanded, "Who are you? What are your intentions in following us?" "Don't rush, Lady Leah Lambert, let me explain slowly," the leader said, tugging at his beard. The two women were shocked. He had actually called out Leah's full name. However, what surprised them even more was that his beard was fake. With a forceful pull, it fell off, revealing a face they hadn't expected, Velis, the merchant who had traveled south on the Fortune. The people behind Velis also removed their hoods or disguises. They were all passengers on the Fortune. "Velis, it's you. I knew you were up to no good." Eileen angrily pointed her hidden dart at him. This guy had always been hovering around her on the ship. "Princess Eileen. Please let me explain." He clearly knew Eileen's identity, but Eileen wasn't surprised. He had already called her by her full name, Leah. Velis raised his hands with a wry smile. "We were ordered by Lady Offena to infiltrate your side and protect you." "What?" Eileen was startled. Velis dismounted, pulled out a scroll of paper, and handed it to her with both hands. "This is my proof, please examine it." Eileen was about to take it when Leah stopped her, taking it herself and carefully examining it. She nodded to Eileen. "It is indeed Lady Offena's handwriting, and the content is exactly as she said." Eileen stared at Velis. "Is it Sister Offena? Then it must be the Queen's doing." Velis lowered his head and remained silent, tacitly agreeing. Eileen suddenly realized something and asked urgently, "Tell me, when did you infiltrate our ranks?" "Oh, Your Highness, please don't be angry." Velis hesitated, stammering. "We found you at Stone Tower Fortress and then followed you all the way to the Northwest Bay." He suddenly knelt on one knee. "The time we encountered the black-spotted tiger in the forest, it was our negligence in protecting you. Please forgive us." At that time, they were unfamiliar with the area, and Eileen and Leah were running around in the forest, losing track of them for a while. Fortunately, Paul and Laddie came to their rescue. "Stone Tower Fortress? Isn't it not far from Crystal Radiance?" Eileen felt inexplicably discouraged. It turned out her whereabouts had been known to her sister all along. Chapter 346 Audience with the King. A beautifully decorated carriage slowly made its way to the Crystal Palace. Baron Hansel Abbott sat inside, eyes closed, but his mind was racing. He was about to meet His Majesty the King, and he had to be careful. My son, don't be nervous. His Majesty is a kind and benevolent king. I've already instructed you on etiquette. As for the rest, just say what you have to say." Sitting beside him was a man in his 40s, Hansel's father, older Abbot. "Yes, father." Despite this, Hansel's expression remained complex. Old Abbot was quite pleased. Just yesterday, his youngest son, Hansel, had suddenly returned to their home in Crystal Palace. The family hadn't even recovered from their joy when Hansel eagerly requested an audience with His Majesty. Old Abbot learned the reason. News of the pirate invasion of West Harbor had reached the Northwest Bay. The Northwest Lords, led by Paul Gleman, planned to send troops to defend the king, and their fleet had already set sail south. His youngest son had returned to Crystal Glory as an envoy of the Northwestern Lords to coordinate with the royal government to jointly suppress the pirates. "Ah, Hansel, you can finally serve the kingdom openly and honorably, just like your brother, fulfilling your long-held wish." The old father was very pleased. Since it was his youngest son's first audience with the king, he decided to personally accompany him to the palace to prevent Hansel from making any inappropriate remarks that might leave a bad impression on His Majesty. The carriage slowly entered the palace gates. Hansel stepped down and identified himself to the royal guards on duty. "I am Hansel, Abbot of the Abbot family, here to pay homage to His Majesty on behalf of the Northwestern Lords." Hansel Abbot. The guard felt he had heard the name somewhere before. "Ah, isn't that the son of the prostitute? The son born to the prostitute whom Earl Abbot had brazenly brought into his household years ago, according to his elders, had caused quite a stir at the time, ruining the Earl's future." A fleeting look of contempt crossed the guard's eyes. Royal guards were selected from the purest noble bloodlines, and naturally held no liking for someone like Hansel who had polluted the noble bloodline. He carefully examined the token Hansel handed him. "Go in," the guard said gruffly. The fleeting contempt and the contempt in his tone deeply stung Hansel. For a moment, he suddenly missed the Northwest Bay. At least there, people wouldn't look down on him because of his bloodline. Hansel suppressed his intense discomfort, turned calmly, and entered the carriage. The carriage started moving again, slowly passing through the palace gates. This scene was witnessed by someone in another carriage not far from the gates. "Hansel Abbot, Eileen," in the carriage, murmured the name as the palace drew near. "What's he doing back at Crystal Radiance? Did Paul send him, Baron Abbot?" "The Baron Hansel Abbot who served as the royal commissioner in Arda?" "Your Highness, are you sure you're not mistaken?" Guard Leah covered her mouth, expressing her surprise. "Yes, I'm sure I'm not mistaken," Eileen replied confidently. Upon reaching the palace gates, the carriage was stopped by the guards. "Who goes there? Come out for inspection." Because the carriage was extremely simple, without any heraldic markings, clearly belonging to a commoner, the guards were very rude, and a large group of them surrounded the carriage. "It's me," Eileen said, pulling back the curtains covering the carriage window and turning to the captain with a displeased expression. "Your Highness Eileen?" The royal guards were collectively shocked. The person sitting in the carriage was none other than the little princess, whom they hadn't seen in a long time. They were unaware that Eileen had run away from home, assuming the princess had slipped out of the palace through another gate in disguise and returned through this one. "Excuse me," the captain led his men in a chorus of bows, then quickly cleared the way for the carriage. In a side hall of the palace, Hansel respectfully bowed to the king, then handed a letter to a servant beside him, who in turn passed it to Rodney. If it were one of Rodney's close associates, such formality wouldn't be necessary, but Hansel wasn't, nor was his father, who had sat on the sidelines for years, so he had to follow the proper protocol. The white-haired king unfolded the letter and read it carefully. The letter, written by Paul Gleman and other lords of the Northwest Bay, requested military assistance from the royal army to wipe out the pirates. Yes, Paul felt his influence wasn't enough, so he enlisted the help of his allies, the Parker, Heller, and Ferdinand families, to jointly petition the king. The lords of the Northwest are truly commendable for their loyalty and bravery, once again sharing the kingdom's burdens. First, Paul Gleman proactively provided food when the kingdom's army was short of provisions. Later, Gleman, along with other lords, supplied a large quantity of high-quality, inexpensive military equipment when the royal army was locked in a stalemate with the rebels. This made Rodney look at the lords of this remote corner of the kingdom, the Northwest Bay, with new respect. Especially Gleman, the king specifically had the officials in charge of the heraldry investigate the family's history. Sometimes, He considered whether he should wipe away those old grievances and restore the family's honor. The king sighed. Alice, if lords in other places were as eager to serve the country as the lords of the Northwest, how could Giles not be pacified? By the way, Hansel has also made great contributions. Thank you for your hard work. It seems that Catherine's decision to send you as royal envoys to contact the lords in various regions was correct. Not at all. Serving the kingdom is our duty, Hansel quickly replied modestly. He continued, Your Majesty, before coordinating with the kingdom's army in the attack, the fleet in the Northwest Bay needs a port as a base for repairs and supplies. Please decide. A port? Rodney stroked his beard. The request was reasonable. Hansel, can the generals of the Northwest Bay control their soldiers to prevent them from causing trouble? The king was well aware of the nature of armies in this era and feared these foreign troops might cause him some trouble. Your Majesty, as far as I know, the discipline of the Northwest Army is second only to the kingdom's regular army. Please rest assured, they will not harass the local area. Hansel had spent so long in Arda and naturally knew Paul's army. He had wanted to say it was unparalleled in the world, but feared offending the king. Very well, I trust your judgment. Therefore, let Kiel be the base for the Northwest Fleet. This port is closest to your brother Harrison's base and will facilitate communication. Thank you, Your Majesty. Hansel bowed to the king. He had already learned from his father that his brother had been appointed commander in the campaign against the pirates. Chapter 347 Going Home. The familiar corridors, the familiar gardens. Eileen's eyes widened as she looked at everything familiar. Having been away from home for over a year and a half, the palace had hardly changed. She hurried along with Leah, rushing through the corridors towards the Queen's chambers. Your Highness, Princess Eileen, thank God. The palace servants she encountered along the way all showed expressions of surprise and joy. The little princess's sudden disappearance, publicly stated as her staying with relatives in Gabella, was hardly a matter of not returning for over a year. Anyone could guess that something must have happened. Eileen was usually very gentle and kind to the servants, and they naturally didn't want anything bad to happen to the little princess. Now, seeing her safely reappear in the palace, everyone she met breathed a sigh of relief. Eileen smiled at every servant who bowed to her, but her pace didn't slow down at all. Finally, she arrived at the palace she had longed for, and a woman's figure appeared at the door. Mother, Eileen cried, throwing herself into Queen Phyllis's arms. The queen embraced the princess tightly, unable to utter a word. Two streams of tears on her cheeks revealed her overwhelming emotions, and the surrounding ladies in waiting and servants also wiped away tears. After landing, Velas had sent men day and night to Jingai to report, so Queen Phyllis already knew that Eileen had returned. However, to avoid any complications, no one told the queen that the group had almost encountered pirates. Eileen, my darling, how could you be so heartless? I'm sorry, Mother, I should have returned sooner. The mother and daughter wept in each other's arms for a long time before being separated at the urging of those around them. The female guard, Leah, suddenly knelt on one knee before the queen and said in a deep voice, Your Majesty, please punish me for my sins. Queen Phyllis stared at her for a long time, then shook her head and said, No, you are innocent. Leah, Irene is the lord you serve, and it was her decision, not yours, to run away from home, though I don't want to see such a thing happen. And you, faithfully fulfilled the duties of a knight, Your Majesty. Leah still didn't raise her head, her voice choked with emotion. Queen Phyllis helped the female knight up with both hands. Get up, loyal knight, look who has come to see you. Leah's gaze passed over the queen, and a pair of figures came into her view. Father. Mother, she cried out in surprise and joy. Leah, my daughter. The three of them embraced tightly. In a side hall of the palace, King Rodney was discussing the specifics of the Northwest Fleet with Abbott and his son. Your Majesty, the Northwest Fleet is equipped with powerful weapons, and they have extensive experience in dealing with pirates. When I first arrived in the Northwest Bay, it was also ravaged by pirates, but they were wiped out in less than 6 months. Of course, this time we will still have to rely on Your Majesty's regular army. Those Northwesters will surely bow down before Your Majesty's divine might. Hansel was speaking eloquently, as if the defeat of the pirates was already certain as long as the two armies joined forces. I also know something about Earl Gleman's suppression of the pirates, the king pondered. How, though young, he's certainly a capable lord. By the way, Hansel, it's said that Earl Gleman invented a fire-breathing weapon with remarkable effects. Do you know anything about it? Well, Your Majesty, actually, the official name should be cannons and muskets, one large and one small. But, Hansel hesitated. Earl Gleman is very secretive. It's difficult for anyone outside the Arda army to know the specifics. Alright, Rodney didn't press further. Which nobleman didn't have his own secrets? Some things even the king couldn't force someone to reveal. At this moment, a servant rushed over and whispered a few words in Rodney's ear. Hansel clearly sensed that the previously dignified king had suddenly become unsettled. His facial expression became agitated, mostly showing happiness, but also mixed with anger. This was a bit puzzling. Ahem, King Rodney cleared his throat, regaining his previous composure and dignity. He said to Hansel's father, Minister Abbot, let's end it here for today. Your son has done a good job. Old Abbot quickly stood up modestly. Your Majesty flatters me. The king then turned to Hansel and said, Tomorrow I will give you a written order. Take it to Kiel and find the local administrator. He will assist you in handling the repair and resupply of the Northwest Fleet. Yes, Your Majesty, Hansel replied respectfully. Then, you may go back and rest. The king stood up, ending the audience. Abbot and his son watched Rodney leave the side hall through a side door. As soon as King Rodney was out of Abbot's sight, he quickened his pace, and his personal guards hurriedly followed him. He only stopped in front of the Queen's bedchamber, slightly adjusted his attire, and then strode in at a leisurely pace. Entering the living room of the palace, he finally saw the person he longed to see, Eileen nestled beside her mother, the two sharing their innermost thoughts. Your Majesty, you've arrived. The night Leah's parents noticed the king's entrance and immediately stepped forward to pay their respects. Eileen then noticed her father's arrival. She hurriedly stood up, yet dared not look Rodney in the eye. She was flustered, somewhat like a child who had done something wrong, and in a sense, she had. Queen Phyllis quickly went to her husband's side, glared at him, and whispered a warning. Don't frighten the child, the king muttered. I know. He went to Eileen's side, looking at his anxious, downcast daughter, and gently stroked her head, saying in a tone tinged with reproach and guilt, You silly child, why did you run off without a word? Do you know how worried your mother has been these past few days? Father, the king's touch eased all of Eileen's unease. She rushed into her father's arms, the long-lost warmth returning to her. I was scared, Eileen said, tears streaming down her face, her voice choked with emotion. I was scared, I was really scared. That fear wasn't the usual fear of being punished for wrongdoing, it was an indescribable fear. I know, the king repeated slowly, his guilt growing stronger. I will never, he started to say, but the words wouldn't come out. When the interests of the nation and his daughter's happiness were once again weighed on the scales, what choice would he ultimately make? Father in heaven, punish me, Rodney murmured in his heart. Chapter 348 The fleet has arrived. The female knight, Leah, was taken home by her parents, leaving only the royal family in the living room to share their feelings. However, they couldn't yet be considered a complete family. It's such a pity that my sister is fighting in the south right now. Father, how is the situation there? Eileen sighed, then couldn't help but worry about Catherine. Don't worry, Rodney smiled and comforted her, the royal army will definitely defeat the rebels, and then your sister will be back. The king didn't elaborate on the specific situation, and Eileen didn't press for details. While she was in the Northwest Bay, she had learned from discussions about the situation in the south among the government officials and the military that the royal army and the rebels were locked in a stalemate, with neither side able to gain the upper hand. Rodney asked, by the way, Eileen, what kind of person is Earl Paul Gleman? After Catherine led her troops south, intelligence about Eileen's situation in the Northwest Bay was regularly submitted to the king. Although Rodney already had a general understanding from the intelligence reports, he still wanted to hear his youngest daughter's own account. Paul, Earl Gleman, how should I put it? Eileen tilted her head and thought for a moment. He's a rather dull person in his daily life. Unlike other nobles who are keen on socializing, banquets, or nightly tournaments, the Earl spends his days either staring at a pile of charts or holed up in his office writing and drawing. He has a bit of the air of a reclusive scholar, but his knowledge is very diverse and broad. He doesn't specialize in one area but often has amazing insights. He also has many interesting and practical inventions. Paper, porcelain, these are already popular in Crystal Radiance, right? And canned food, as far as I know, has begun to be supplied in large quantities to the kingdom's army. There's also a mirror that can see tiny creatures, and, She was about to mention muskets and cannons, but remembering Paul's repeated warnings not to discuss new weapons in front of others, Eileen stopped herself. "Oh? So he's quite a talent," the king stroked his beard and commented. He then asked, "What happened in the war in the Northwest Bay last year?" Eileen pouted, "It's all that guy named Kent's fault. He used to use the trust of the previous Duke of the Northwest, and the lords of the Northwest dared not speak out against him. Before the war even broke out, he sent people to extort Arda. I was on the battlefield when the envoy arrived. You didn't see how arrogant that envoy was. Later, the Duke of the Northwest died mysteriously, his death very suspicious. And contrary to convention, the title was passed to Earl Kent, a man of a different surname. It all seemed like a conspiracy. The Duke's younger brother came forward and revealed that Earl Kent had murdered the Duke using witchcraft, and then the war broke out. Is that so?" The king nodded. What his youngest daughter said was similar to what he had learned through the royal envoy. After meeting the king, Hansel rode swiftly to the west coast the next day with his documents, and 2 days later encountered the kingdom's army on the march, the army commanded by his brother Harrison, which was on its way to suppress the pirates. Hansel relayed the combined forces plan and the king's order to his brother, instructing him to choose a base as close to Kiel as possible upon arrival in the war zone. Harrison agreed, a pragmatic man. He naturally welcomed any additional assistance. Moreover, this was his first time being entrusted with a command independently, and he felt a little insecure. Although the brothers hadn't seen each other for a long time, the military situation was urgent. After a meal together, Hansel bid farewell to Harrison and set off for Kiel ahead of everyone else. Upon arriving in the port city, Hansel first visited the local town hall and presented the king's order to discuss the entry of the Northwest Fleet into port. He then arranged for many men to stake out various coastal cities. According to the initial plan, the fleet would depart within 4 days of his departure from Lakeshire. If nothing unexpected happened en route, they should already be in this area of water and patrolling near the coastline. The fleet would frequently send men ashore to purchase supplies and leave messages to facilitate Hansel's search for them. Although they declared themselves a loyalist fleet from the Northwest Bay, their refusal to allow port officials to board and inspect their ships meant that no port dared to let them dock until they received clear instructions from Crystal Radiance. 2 days later, a carrier pigeon brought news that the staking out team had made contact with the fleet, and they were already heading towards Kielport. On the evening of January 25, 1992, Sacred Calendar, Kielport of the Kingdom of Waldo welcomed a fleet of 12 ships flying a red dragon flag. Due to rumors of pirates, few ships entered or left Kielport, so the sudden appearance of such a large fleet attracted many onlookers. First to enter the port were 6 galleys, followed by 6 sailing ships. Since the rise of maritime trade in the Northwest Bay, the residents of the major southern ports were no longer unfamiliar with these new types of ships that did not require oarsmen. People sensed a chilling aura from the dark metal pipes protruding from the sides of the ships. Although they didn't know what they were, their intuition told them that these ships were probably not there to transport goods. Alda, for the first time, projected her power beyond the Northwest Bay. Hansel stood on the dock, waving a handkerchief at the fleet. Behind him stood his brother Harrison and the mayor of Kiel. "Harrison, is this the fleet from the Northwest Bay? What strange ships, Mayor. I've seen merchant ships like these a few times this year, but these are warships, aren't they? What are those dark pipes?" Listening to their discussion, Hansel felt a strange sense of superiority. "Haha, never seen them before, have you? Those things are called cannons. One shot can turn a bunch of grown men into mincemeat. Hey, Baron Abbott." At the nearest berth, an Arden naval commander walked across the gangplank onto the dock and waved to Hansel. "Lieutenant Colonel Tirpitz." Hansel stepped forward and shook his hand. "Are you here to command the fleet this time?" "Haha, of the 3 fleets, mine has the most operational ships, so I was chosen to command this operation. Come, let me introduce you. This is my elder brother." After the 2 sides introduced themselves, Tirpitz asked the question he was most concerned about. "Lord Harrison, what is the current situation with the pirates?" Harrison replied, "We have deployed scouts on the roads in and out of West Harbor. Recent signs indicate that they seem less active than before, holed up in the city, doing who knows what." Tirpitz thought to himself that Hansel's brother was indeed quite cautious. Others his age would have already been unable to resist launching an attack on the city. "Lord Harrison, I have brought you a generous gift." "Oh, we just encountered a pirate ship at sea and captured a group of prisoners." Perhaps we can extract some information from them. Harrison was overjoyed. That's wonderful. Let's organize the interrogation immediately. Chapter 349 Finding Fun. Dark clouds filled the sky, and a cold north wind howled over Sihanoukville. The city streets were deserted, residents huddled in their homes, fearful and anxious. In these extraordinary times, no one wanted to risk trouble. Over 20 days ago, a band of pirates, seemingly appearing out of nowhere, suddenly attacked Sihanoukville, wiping out the kingdom's naval forces stationed there. The pirates quickly seized control of the entire city. These men were demons straight out of hell. Anyone who dared to defy them was dragged to the square and publicly executed. The residents of Sihanoukville, long accustomed to peace and having only heard tales of pirates from their elders, now truly understood what impending doom meant. The pirates went door to door, demanding half the wealth of ordinary people, taking only half, under the guise of honor among thieves. Those of higher status were not so fortunate. They were imprisoned in the city hall. Inside the most luxurious room in the city hall, the great pirate Captain Edward was flipping through account books, a slight smile playing on his lips, indicating his satisfaction. Tisk tisk tisk, a frivolous voice sounded from the doorway. I used to think that Edward, the great pirate who roamed the seas, was a hero who regarded money as dirt, but I didn't expect that in reality he's just like any other ordinary person, loving money, the young wizard said with a hint of sarcasm. Edward ignored the sarcasm, picked up a cigarette from the table, took 2 puffs, and exhaled a smoke ring with great satisfaction. Young man, why do you think I became a pirate? For thrilling adventures? To build a world-renowned reputation? Ha ha ha, those are just labels others have given me. Besides, Edward stood up and walked to the window, gazing at the docks of West Harbor. To maintain a real fleet, especially a pirate fleet that lives on the edge of a knife every day, just being good at fighting isn't enough. You need money, and you need the ability to manage money. Besides, the money our cause needs is a bottomless pit. After all, that prince hasn't truly taken the throne yet, so his support is always limited. Nathan shrugged and said, all right, you're right. By the way, how much money have we collected these past few days? Edward waved the ledger and answered proudly, the residents' donations, the city hall's treasury, in Aldo's gold coins, it's nearly 50,000. Hell, after all, Aldo's maritime trade isn't very developed. If we could capture a port city in Horn Bay, the money we could plunder there would be enormous. Oh. Right, the pirate captain slapped his forehead, our money will continue to increase. Remember the bills we sent to Crystal Radiance a while ago? Some haven't arrived yet, HMPH, Nathan said with amusement, so most of it has arrived? Our great King Rodney actually allows this kind of aid to the enemy. Edward spoke with an air of self-righteousness. The support of the nobility is the cornerstone of royal power. If we forcibly prohibit it, those nobles will cause the king a great deal of trouble, especially during this sensitive period with rebellions in the south. Nathan, just you wait and see. Even our illustrious prince, even with our assistance, will eventually have to seek the support of the nobility, HMPH. Those parasites who only know how to leech off the body of the nation. Nathan was clearly disdainful. Are you still going to release those pigs locked up in the city hall? Of course. Those who have received their money, I will naturally release them. I, Edward, am a man of my word. As for those who haven't received their money by the deadline, which is the day after tomorrow, I, Edward, am also a man of my word. Nathan smiled slightly. Captain, perhaps you could extend the deadline a bit more so that we can receive more money. Edward shook his head. I'm afraid Baron Abbott won't give us much time. Judging by the days, it should be arriving soon, right? I must say, this Baron is quite a cautious man. Perhaps, having just been promoted from Royal Guard to military commander, he doesn't want to leave any blemishes on his first battle. He seems to be waiting for something. I just found out what he's waiting for. Oh? Tell me, your fellow countryman, a Northwesterner, Nathan said somewhat sarcastically. Abbott is waiting for a fleet from the Northwest Bay. Edward raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. It seems the victory against the pirates 2 years ago has greatly boosted the confidence of the local lords, who now dare to send their fleets thousands of miles to pledge allegiance to the king. Mr. Edward, the pirate leader said, I don't think they were entirely loyal to the royal family. It's said that maritime trade between the Northwest Bay and this area is becoming increasingly frequent. If we occupy this place, wouldn't that be like putting a thorn in our throat? The pirate leader fell silent, puffing on his pipe in deep thought. Today we received a report that a ship that went out on patrol didn't return on time. Could it be? Nathan, let's leave tomorrow. Of course, we should leave a small gift for Lord Abbot, who has come from afar. How, are you scared? Say what you will. Remember, our purpose is to exhaust the enemy, not to open a second battlefield for Giles. More than half of the ships that went on this expedition have already returned to transport supplies to West Harbor. Now we only have 30 ships. Better safe than sorry, tisk tisk. Mr. Edward, I agree with your caution, but isn't it a bit too much to be cautious with a fleet of only 12 ships? 12? Are you sure? 12. I'm sure. My informants counted them one by one in Kiel Harbor. Their red dragon flags are easy to spot. Kiel Harbor? It's not far from here. How about another raid? After what happened at West Harbor, the enemy won't be stupid enough to let us succeed a second time. Nathan raised his hand and clenched it tightly. Then let's wait for them to walk right into our trap. Edward nodded. All right, young man, your suggestion is tempting. We'll leave only a small gift for Lord Abbot on shore, then the whole crew will ambush the Northwest Fleet at sea. However, I can only wait until the day after tomorrow. I really must leave then. Is there anything else? Yes, Nathan suggested. If it's just 12 ships, you can leave only half. Edward rubbed his forehead in frustration. I can't stand you. You seem more like a bloodthirsty pirate than I am. Nathan grinned, a glint of cunning in his eyes. Okay, I admit it. I came here to have fun. The bigger the fun, the more exciting the better. Mundane days are too boring, the pirate captain sighed. I give up. I'll leave you half the ships, and my first mate will stay to assist you. The young wizard narrowed his eyes, recalling the crystal granary, the raging fire that brought him much joy. It seems a new kind of joy is coming. How long will this time last? Chapter 350 Execution in a Line at Sea, Part 1. 12 warships formed a long column, silently sailing southwards under the leadership of the flagship, the Unicorn. The fleet wasn't just sailing, a series of booming sounds echoed as the ship's gunners conducted firing drills. To simulate a battlefield environment as closely as possible, they had been using live ammunition for the past 2 days, the entire fleet sailing shrouded in smoke. Fleet Commander Tirpitz stood at the bow of the Unicorn, leaning against the railing, pipe in hand, silently watching the sea ahead. According to the interrogation of the pirate prisoners, the pirates entrenched in West Harbor initially numbered over 60 ships, but they would send at least 20 to transport their plundered supplies. Nearly 40 warships remained. Could his fleet handle them? This was the first time Arden's military power had been displayed to the world beyond the Northwest Bay, and the partner was the kingdom's army. If they messed up, wouldn't it tarnish Lord Giles' reputation? Failure would lead to many serious consequences. Externally, the rest of the kingdom had always looked down on the Northwest Bay, and defeat would only exacerbate this disdain. That wasn't the main issue. The stereotypes had been there for a long time. The real problem lay within the Northwest Bay itself. Defeat would severely damage Lord Gleman's prestige among the lords, and Arden's hard-won position in the War of the Usurpers might be lost. Although a soldier, Tirpitz was not entirely unaware of the current political situation in the Northwest. The lords were establishing an organization called the Customs Union, and as with any alliance, there needed to be a leader, or rather, a de facto dominant figure. Although this alliance was proposed by Arda, the position of leader might not necessarily fall to him. Every powerful territory, or one that considered itself powerful, was eager to seize it. Arda desperately needed to boost his political prestige again, and military victory was often the most direct way. He glanced at the sailors on deck, nervously practicing loading procedures, and recalled the words Admiral Austin often used to encourage his men. We are the most powerful and efficient killing machine of this era, equipped with revolutionary weapons, their power comparable to legendary artifacts, the well-organized and clearly defined officers and soldiers trained day after day, mastering and perfecting every step of operating these artifacts. Upon encountering the enemy, they can methodically unleash a torrent of death upon them. Good rations ensure their robust physiques, strict discipline forges their resilient spirits, ample pay maintains their high morale, and generous compensation eliminates their worries. What army in the world could do better? We are the strongest. Tirpitz repeatedly murmured this to himself. Commander Tirpitz, a slightly immature voice interrupted his thoughts. Tirpitz turned around, his gaze shifting downwards to the young officer candidate. Mr. Allen, Tirpitz addressed him with a smile, using the proper respect due to an adult. Reporting, Commander, today's line infantry tactical firing training is complete, Officer Candidate Allen reported loudly to the fleet commander in a serious tone. Although older ships like the South remained in Franklin Harbor for repairs, the officer candidates on these ships were also assigned to the southbound fleet for training. The Navy wouldn't miss any opportunity for real combat to cultivate the next generation of qualified officers. Good job. Let the artillery rest, we're likely to encounter fierce fighting today. Yes, Commander. Oh, right, Mr. Allen, is there anything else, Commander? Tirpitz called out to the young officer candidate. Once the battle begins, you'll stay with the gunnery officer on the lower deck of the Unicorn and await his orders. A child's physique made it easy to move around in the low cabins, making it ideal for relaying messages and orders. Yes, Commander, Allen saluted and left excitedly. This is the first time line infantry tactics will be used in actual combat. I wonder how effective it will be. The Navy's line infantry tactics originated from the Army's line infantry tactics. The line infantry tactics of the Army, invented by Lord Gleman, combined with his inventions of muskets and cannons, played a crucial role in the series of wars in which Arda participated. In every battle, Arda soldiers, armed with muskets and lined up in neat rows, became a persistent nightmare for enemy soldiers. They marched in perfect unison to the beat of drums, and at the officer's command, they opened fire in perfect unison, efficiently reaping the lives of the enemy. After the Army's great success, Lord Gleman ordered naval officers to study the application of line infantry tactics in naval warfare. Because of his invention of epoch-making new weapons and tactics, Paul Gleman was considered within the Army to be a born genius favored by the Lord of Light. Otherwise, how could he, without systematic military education, lead so many successes? The Naval High Command, with their inexplicable trust in their lord, immediately began studying the application of line infantry tactics at sea. Thus, the Navy changed its daily training methods from individual ship combat to a greater emphasis on teamwork. Because sailing ships at this time had narrow bows and sterns, they could generally only mount a few light cannons. The main cannons were mounted on the sides of the warships, perpendicular to the keel. Therefore, the specific tactic was for each ship to face the enemy sideways, forming a long line end-to-end to maximize the fleet's firepower. This way, half of each warship's cannons could fire at the enemy. The Naval Command's Naval Operations Regulations explicitly defined the column formation as the standard formation for naval operations. All warships of each squadron must strive to maintain a straight line with their squadron leaders. According to this operational regulation, if a captain deviated from the linear formation during combat, he might be court-martialed afterward, even if he achieved greater victories. This new tactic also compensated for another weakness of the Ardan Navy. In any case, they were a newly formed, young army, and their soldiers' combat capabilities at sea were significantly inferior to those of traditional naval powers, such as the Gulf states. Traditional naval tactics, such as boarding maneuvers, were insufficient for the Ardan Navy to compete with the enemy when forces were roughly equal. Therefore, how to maximize one's range and firepower advantages, and inflict heavy casualties on the enemy before they can board the ship, thus dealing an indelible blow to their morale, has become a top priority for the Navy when researching new tactics. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.